Okay, are we on? Listen only mode is what?
Yep.
Broadcast has now started. Thank you, Chair.
Let's call the meeting to order of the August 19th, 2021 Harbor Commission. And Ms. Rodriguez, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Kramer,
Present.
Commissioner McCray,
Present.
Commissioner Nelson,
Present.
Commissioner Sloan,
Here.
Commissioner Stanowicz,
Here.
Commissioner Stedman,
Here.
Chair Sly.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair Sly and Commissioners, good to see you. No changes to the agenda tonight.
Okay, thank you. And do we have anyone signed up for public comment on items other than what is on the agenda?
At this time, there's nobody from the public with their hands raised, but I do want to remind the public if they would like to make a public comment, they can indicate that by using the raise their hand icon on the control panel. And once I see their hand, I'll let them know that they have 2 minutes to speak when it's their turn. Thank you. There's still no one at this time.
Okay, thank you. The first item on our agenda, even ahead of the minutes, is the election of a chair and a vice chair and committee assignments. So what we thought we'd do tonight is, and welcome to suggestions if there are other ideas, is take nominations and seconds for the chair position, and then take nominations and seconds for the vice chair position. Understanding that if someone was nominated for both of those positions, that would be okay. Might not get elected as chair, but might get elected as vice chair, so could be on both. And after closing the nominations, we would take a vote on the chair and a vote on the vice chair, and I will turn the meeting over to the newly elected chair. So if that's okay with everybody, we'll proceed in that direction. So let's open the nominations for chair, please.
I'd like to nominate Merritt McCray for chair.
I'd like to second that nomination.
Thank you.
And I would accept that nomination. However, I note that Lang has only served a year, and I am perfectly good with him staying on as chair as well.
Merritt, I appreciate that, but I'm all in favor of rotations and fresh voices, and I'm happy to turn it over to someone else. But thank you. Hearing any other nominations?
Nomination for vice chair yet?
I'm not hearing any other nominations for chair, so let's go to nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Lang Sly for vice chair.
Yeah, I'll second that.
And okay, thank you. I can make nominations. I would like to nominate Commissioner Kramer for vice chair. And do we have a second?
Sure, I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, we'll close the nominations. And I would like to say that I'll be out of the country for 3 or 4 months next year, so I feel that I should withdraw. I appreciate the nomination for vice chair, but I feel that I should withdraw from that because of my extended absence next year.
Okay. Betsy, how are you feeling about being vice chair?
I think it's good.
Because I know you've served that position and chair for a number of years, so just
Yeah,
wanted.
not for quite a while, and I think I can follow Lang's excellent example
Okay.
and Merritt's excellent example and yours before that.
Okay, good.
All right. We have one commissioner name nominated for chair and one commissioner nominated for vice chair. So if someone would like to make a motion that we accept these nominations by acclamation, we could then, if we had a vote and a motion and a second on that, we could do that in lieu of a roll call, I suppose.
Okay, I so moved. I would move that we nominate Barrett McCray as chairman and Betsy Kramer as vice chair.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that
second.
motion.
Okay. All those in favor of Commissioner Sloan's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Or abstentions? Okay, thank you. We have a new chair and vice chair. And so Merritt, I'm turning this over to you immediately. And I want to thank the commissioners for allowing me the honor of being the chair over this past year. I enjoyed it, and I appreciate your confidence in me being able to keep this unruly body in check for a year. I'm sad that we didn't get to meet in person, but hopefully soon. So, Merritt, sorry I don't have a gavel to hand over to you, but take it away, and the next item will be approval of minutes.
Before we go there, Lang, I'd just like to thank you. I know it's been a difficult year with these web meetings and everything, and I think you've done a great job. So thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jim.
Me.
Thank you, Lang.
Lang, I too would like to thank you. I think you did an excellent job, and I'm doubtless and hope that this continues to be the case, that you are the first and only chair that has served an entire round remotely, never having stepped into City Hall.
Yeah, well, I have my fingers crossed also. So,
Interesting distinction.
yeah.
All right, so I guess I'll move us along. I have pulled up the page that has all the subcommittees here in front of me, and I'll just kind of read through them and then ask the question if there are people that would like to swap positions or be on a committee that they haven't been on. First of all, we have the budget subcommittee with Betsy Kramer, Jim Sloan, and Adam Stanowick. We have the chartering and business activity permits with myself, Michael Nelson. We have commercial fishing with Betsy Kramer, Lang Sly, and John Stedman. We have the RFP selection committee, myself and Michael Nelson. We have the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan with Betsy Kramer and Jim Sloan. And then finally, the Slip Assignment Policy subcommittee with John Stedman, Michael Nelson, and Jim Sloan. And I'd like to, before we begin discussion, note that there are several, at least 3 subcommittees here that have just 2 participants. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we can have as many as 3 on there if anybody's interested.
I think that's true, except for the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan. That was limited to the 2 of us, I think, by council recommended.
Thank you.
Merritt? And Merritt?
Yes, Betsy.
The Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan, Jim and Fry, it's only 2, but that committee has basically ceased to exist.
All right.
Why is it ceasing to exist? Isn't sea level rise?
Because the plan has been adopted rather.
It was,
And And we
develop-
have not met for over a year.
Okay, I'm just assuming that sea level rise is going to continue to be a large and important issue for the waterfront and particularly the harbor in that. Note that in the budget last year, the waterfront department, the only real priority they had in the capital budget, new priority, I guess, was sea level rise. So I'm wondering, do we want to not have a sea level rise committee? Given
Well,
the
I completely agree with you, Michael, but I suggest maybe it shouldn't be called the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan, or we can have a different committee with 3 members on it, for instance.
Okay,
That's just a
This,
suggestion.
this specific committee had not only our commission, but many other people throughout the city involved in it. And it was to develop the plan. The plan's been developed and adopted. So the purpose of this committee, it's not one of our committees. We were just members of a larger committee in this.
okay, okay.
All right, are there any other people that would like to get on a subcommittee that they're not already on, or are feeling like they no longer are able to do what they already had said they would do with respect to a subcommittee?
I would like to be on the RFP committee. I'm down to one committee partly because I was doing the chair exercise as well. But if you like 3 people on that committee, I would enjoy serving on that.
And I would like to continue on that committee and have an idea that it would be great for staff to comment on or participate in. When we received the sea landing proposal over the 4th of July, when I read through that, I noticed that it had been 25 years that lease had been in place, which made me think, is there a larger role for the Harbor Commission to play when a decision is being made to lease a property or to, in fact, renew a lease and carry it on for 30 years? I know that we are asked every 5 years to subject our leasing program to a review by the Planning Commission to determine whether or not a balance has been achieved between the primary uses in the harbor commercial zone and the secondary uses. And I think, and the primary uses, as I read one report, was about the working harbor. And I think events today, particularly with the pandemic and the fiscal impact of the pandemic, for us to have a situation where 30 years can go by without any engagement by the commission in the appropriateness of continuing the same lease and the same leaseholder, as opposed to considering other activities. I wonder if that's a good way to go, and think that maybe the harbor commissioners ought to be involved. And the second reason is because of the economic recovery, we ought to be certain that we are, whatever decision is made for a primary or a secondary use, that we've got a process in place that achieves the optimal value. So I guess my idea was, just like we did with the slip assignment policy committee, is we sort of asked staff to make some recommendation, as much as just a discussion point that would suggest that if the Harbor Commission wanted to engage in the lease proposal process, here would be the opportunity that might be the best without creating a cumbersome and sort of dilatory bureaucratic process. So that's my idea for the request for proposal selection committee, which I believe has only met, once every 2 years. So this will give it some real significance, and offer that up to the commission for discussion.
First I see Mr. Wiltshire has joined in here on the video. I'd like to give him an opportunity to comment on that, and anything that you might have to say with respect to the specifics of the area of the sea landing, previous sea landings lease would be great.
Yeah, I was just kind of hopping on to be a little bit of the party pooper. I don't want to get too much into something that's not agendized, especially on the sea landing RFP specifically. So this item is really to kind of select commission and committee assignments. So hopefully we can just kind of focus it on that. And then if there's kind of a bigger item that we'd like to tackle, then we get that on an agenda for the future.
Yeah, I agree.
That sounds good. All right, so let's continue on with our task at hand.
So if there are no other changes, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the current committee assignments with the change that we add Commissioner Sly to the RFP selection.
I second that.
All right, so let's do this by voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? So the motion carries unanimously. Ms. Rodriguez, do you have that?
Yes, I do have that.
Honorable Chair, this is,
Welcome aboard.
thank
Lang,
you.
we're glad to have you.
My name's Dan Henschke. I'm one of the assistant city attorneys. And normally I wouldn't be attending your committee meetings. I do have to raise a procedural issue for you. When meetings are conducted telephonically, voice votes are technically not permitted. We don't have to go back and do the old one because we can announce that the voice vote was unanimous by everybody present, but all other votes this evening, you need to take a roll call vote to accomplish. It's just a requirement of state law. I apologize for butting in. I'll let you go back to your business.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you very much. All right, so I believe the next item on our agenda is the consent calendar approval of the minutes. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All right. And Angela, would you provide us with a roll call vote?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Kramer,
Aye.
Chair McCray,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sly,
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan,
Yes.
Commissioner Stanowick,
Aye.
and Commissioner Stedman.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, so we'll proceed to the department update, and we have several presentations here. What I'd like to do is to receive these reports, for us to receive the reports and be able to ask questions of the presenter, but then hold off on any public comment with respect to this agenda item until all reports are complete, if that's okay. Take it away with the director's report.
All right, well, good evening again, Harbor Commissioners and anyone who's tuned in from the public. So just anyone from the public. I'm Mike Wiltshire, Waterfront Director. And first and foremost, congrats, new Chair McCray and Vice Chair Kramer. Look forward to the coming year with you at the helm. And yeah, certainly hope we can get back in person at some point. It's been a long year. So I've got a couple items to report on. Unless there's any questions or comments up front, I'll get right into it. Next slide, Angela, hearing none. Well, I was really hoping that I wasn't going to have to continue with these COVID-related updates, but as you're all likely well aware, we've taken a bit of a turn for the worse. So back when we met in June, on June 15th, things were really looking optimistic. So the state essentially fully opened up for business with very limited restrictions. Since then, over the past month or so, the Delta variant's really resulted in an increased case counts locally and nationwide. So I put this same chart that you're used to seeing on the graph. This is the Santa Barbara County Health data, kind of showing COVID cases really since the beginning. So as you can see, kind of where I've got it circled, that's the last month or so, and it's a pretty legitimate spike. So cases are significant right now, and there are impacts to the waterfront. Next slide, Angela. So really the big action that's been taken, so with regards to impacts to the waterfront, as of August 6th, the Santa Barbara County Health implemented an indoor mask mandate. And so this, of course, affects all of our tenants who with indoor operations, as well as our administrative offices. So our front office is still open. The lobby's open. People are conducting business in person as usual. We just ask that everybody wear a mask while they're inside our lobby or in the office space. As of now, there's no other capacity related restrictions. So restaurants and other businesses are still open, with really the only requirement being wearing a mask when you're inside. And just a side note, as far as in-person board and commission meetings, we're likely kind of set back and stuck to virtual for a little while again. I know last meeting we were kind of hoping that this meeting would be in person, but we're really going to follow council's lead on this once they get back to in person. So I think it'll be at least a few months, depending on the way things go. Next slide, Angela. All right, so my next topic is a quick update on sidewalk vending. You may all have noticed an increase in push cart and sidewalk vendors kind of throughout Santa Barbara, and certainly down here in the waterfront area. So this really stems from roughly 2 years ago, the state passed Senate Bill 946, which all but limited or removed local regulation of street and cart vendors. And so that's really allowed these operations to occur in the public right away with little oversight on our part. So the reason I'm bringing this to the Harbor Commission is really more for awareness. So the city is looking at drafting an ordinance now that would allow for some oversight with respect to health and safety and traffic concerns. And to date, there's been one ordinance committee, I think it was last week or the week before, where it was just sort of starting to address this issue. There is definitely a promise of more ordinance committee meetings in an attempt to draft this policy. And because there's really possible impacts to the waterfront, I wanted to make you all aware so that you can participate individually or as a group in these ordinance committee meetings. There is some talk of prohibiting sidewalk vending in high traffic areas like Lower State Street, Stearns Wharf, kind of at the foot of the wharf area. And we have gotten some complaints from our Stearns Wharf vendors, and they've expressed some concern with push carts at the base of Stearns Wharf, just with traffic and congestion in that area. So this is all still very much in process. And if anyone wants to get involved, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can keep you posted with the ordinance committee and how this all moves through. I wanted to pause there to see if the commission had any questions or comments or thoughts on this. Yeah, Commissioner Kramer.
Yeah, Mr. Wiltshire, hi, thank you. Have you seen any problems around the harbor, specific harbor area? I've seen a lot of vendors, for instance, along the bike path by Stearns Wharf and also some of the parking lots, but I was wondering if you've seen any problems around the actual harbor.
Not so much around the harbor itself, but kind of the foot of the wharf bike path, yeah. What you were saying. It has been a little congested down there. I bike that bike path pretty often. There has been some issues with the vendors sort of dumping waste or cut up fruit onto the beach and then just kind of leaving a little bit of a mess. So there has been some nuisance issues, and we have received some complaints from the Stearns Wharf tenants. So yeah, they seem to be proliferating a little bit more, and they're out there.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the group?
I have a quick comment. Go ahead, Adam.
Oh yeah, I was just wondering regarding the ordinance committee and setting up new rules and regulations. I was taking a look at just the sidewalk vending information guide, and just the 3 different types of basically permits that these push carts need, and like the vendor's license, a seller's permit, and a health permit. And I mean, just the health permit alone, I mean, it's simply 2 pages, but it requires an additional 14 documents submitted with this. And I'm just curious, like, before they're adding new rules and regulations, is there somebody that is already enforcing this permit system, or are they checking these permits currently?
Well, Commissioner Stanwyck, in short, no. And so the California legislation is kind of the overarching governing body right now. The city of Santa Barbara, we do not have policy in place or an ordinance in place to sort of regulate these at the moment. So from an enforcement point of view, no, because in short, we don't really have anything to enforce. So that is what the ordinance committee and the city are kind of working towards, to try and get some level of regulation get into play. And so as of now, no, there really is no regulation.
Okay, I was just curious.
So I just wanted to comment that I did take a look at SB 946 and our director's report items here. Sidewalk vending is not allowed, permitted, and that list, and it already pushes the limits of SB 946. And I'm sure this is a work in progress, and we'll kind of have to see what kind of authority we are able to retain. But Commissioner Stanwyck, you are quite correct. The County Department of Public Health, their temporary food facility requirements, those are based in state regulation as well. They're actually quite a high hurdle. And I think that's likely where we'll end up having most of the ability to control what goes on down there with respect to food carts, you know, as a county. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and move on to the business services report.
Chair McCray, I had one or two more slides to go on this one.
Oh, I apologize.
No.
Mr. Wiltshire, go ahead.
Next slide, Angela. All right, so one other topic that's come up since our last meeting in June is the placement of a Chumash Tomo canoe in the West Beach outrigger area. So there's a picture up right now. Representatives of the Chumash placed this Tomo on the beach in early July, and they're requesting that the Waterfront Department waive the $275 per year West Beach rack permit fee. So just for a little background, the Waterfront Department manages that area of the beach through our West Beach rack permit program, which is outlined in our fee resolution. So there is a requirement for any outrigger or sailboat or tomo that's placed on the beach to apply for a permit and pay the associated fee. So it should be noted that our fees are really something that's part of the budget and part of the fee resolution. So any waiving of fees is really ultimately a council decision. Waiving of fees for a specific group is not something that can be done at the Waterfront or Harbor Commission level, but would have to be a council action. And so really, I'm bringing this to Harbor Commission, to you all today, as I know council would likely appreciate any insight or recommendations that you have on this matter. And staff, Waterfront staff and myself, we intend to take this to council on September 14th for their decision on waiving these fees for the Chumash Tomo. Another thing to note is that we do have space within the permit area, and our fee resolution kind of already calls out the allowance of a Tomo canoe specifically. And so there is space there. And then additionally, so you all should have received some correspondence by email from the Chumash prior to this meeting. So I don't know if you got that in time, but Angela did send it out a few hours ago. So that should be in your inbox, a note from that group. So again, I'll turn it back over to you for any questions, your input, or even a motion if you see fit. And I'm under the impression that there may be a public comment on this item if we wanted to check that as well.
Are you making a recommendation to council when you appear before them?
No, not necessarily. We've just been, we're going to kind of present this as a request from the Chumash for a fee waiver. And so it will be in council's hands to make a decision on waiving that fee if they choose to do so.
Aren't there some other vehicles for maybe getting grants for this fee that might be worthwhile exploring before we look into a waiver?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, I know the dollar amount's quite low, so it's sort of just a matter of process at this point. And so, yes, I mean, typically if this went through the budget process, this could be seen as sort of an outside funding request where council could decide to either spend general fund dollars or go seek other funding measures. I guess since it's there now, I feel kind of obligated to get this to council fairly soon. And so September 14th is as soon as we can get it to them. And I thought it prudent to bring it by you as Harbor Commission to get some input from you before going to council.
And would there be other groups behind the Chumash community that might be asking for similar waivers?
I can't necessarily answer that, but there's certainly the potential. As our fee resolution stands now, it's kind of applied equally to all, and we don't really get into the business of waiving fees for specific groups. But this one is kind of a unique request.
Do you know I know near Potter's Hill, there's a historic monument that this is the location of one of the largest cities in the Chumash Nation, or at least that's my understanding. Does the waterfront department have an idea of the footprint of Chumash settlements in the waterfront area, and whether or not the canoe placement would occur in an archaeological area that was part of the Chumash history?
Yeah, I don't want to dive too much into the history. I'm not an expert on that by any means. I know it is a very kind of important piece of Santa Barbara's history. As some or maybe all of you know, the coastline looked very different 100+ years ago prior to the breakwater being built. So if we're talking about the specific land itself, maybe not. I mean, West Beach did not even exist in its shape and form prior to the breakwater being built. But I don't think that diminishes the significance of kind of a near ocean option for the Tomo.
Mr. Wilshire, I guess it doesn't really matter a lot since we're not being asked to make a recommendation, but I think it's wonderful that this canoe's on the beach. However, I don't see favoring any one group over others with regard to fees. I mean, we're all citizens and we're all deserving in our own ways. And it seems to me that it's a reasonable fee for any group, and that one group shouldn't be favored over another. I mean, I guess everybody's got an interest in of some sort or another, but that's my thought anyway.
Okay, yeah, and I don't need anything official from you. It was other than kind of letting you know that we will be taking this to council for a fee waiver. So if there was a unanimous thought or a motion that you wanted to make, that I could relay that. But other than that, we'll be going to council on the 14th.
So can we do that at this meeting, or does it require an agenda item on its own?
No, it was an agendized item, so I believe you could make your opinion as the Harbor Commission known.
May I interrupt and let you guys know that there is one person from the public with their hand raised if you guys want to do public comment before any recommendations or motions?
And I
Can we hear from Dan?
Yeah, I need to. if I might interject here, I think it was the chair who asked if you can actually take an action on this tonight, or if you need to agendize it for a future meeting. The agenda says that under director's report that there will be a Tomoa Canoe discussion. There is no indication of any action that would be taken that would, and there's nothing on the agenda that would give a reasonable person notice that action on this item or action on the fee waiver might be taken. And so I have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Wiltshire that you are allowed to take an action tonight. And I would advise that if you want to take an action on this in the future, that you either schedule a special meeting or put it on a future agenda, a future regular agenda item.
So I would like to propose that we do that if it fits with the current timeline. If you would like a recommendation from us, Mr. Wiltshire.
Yeah, and I'm aware that you, thanks Dan, by the way, thanks for clarifying that. I didn't want to get myself into hot water. Yeah, why don't I see where the timeline is at, and then we can possibly bring it back to the September meeting if you guys would like to take an action on it.
Thank you very much. You know I mentioned that I would hold off on public comment until the end of this, but we've had quite a discussion on it. Let's go ahead and hear our public comment on this specific item. Ms. Rodriguez?
Okay, so the person with their hand raised is Reginald, I'm sorry if I'm saying this name wrong, Pickling. Regional Pickling, I'm gonna unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And it appears that you're self-muted at the moment.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. It's Reginald Pagling. I'm a Chumash elder, member of the Santinez Band of Mission Indians. I built this Tamol. It's more of a traditional, it is a traditional vessel, and we see this as an opportunity to start dialogue. I appreciate this chance to go ahead and talk to a commission because I'm several commissions myself, including one state one. So I understand the Brown Act and that discussion about, this is a discussion, not an action item. So I appreciate that opportunity, but it's also an opportunity to look at having us create that government to government dialogue that's so direly needed along the coast. And this is a great opportunity to look at that. And those discussions about, is there anything else? Yes, we can discuss about more things, what the city is doing about not only the sidewalks that allow us, but possibly even beach bicycles that we can, or carts that we can move our elders down and allow other people to do things. I mean, there's some good dialogue about grants. I appreciate that. Just appreciate also the opportunity that we are allowed to keep that Tamol there as we also deal with this variant COVID and try to keep our communities safe. And I know I'm getting close to my time, so I just wanted to let you know, we thank you. We hope we can keep it there until this is resolved with the city and we go forward and make this actually a part of a direly needed part of this community. And I thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, I had one more slide, Chair McCray.
Go ahead.
It was a quick one. It was really just a list of a few upcoming topics that we'll plan to discuss on agenda in the fall. So first off, Brian Bossy, it does owe the commission FY21 budget, kind of our year-end roundup. So that should come in September. Additionally, the slip transfer policy subcommittee meeting, so they'll be presenting findings and recommendations on slip transfer fees and policy. And we'll be bringing some proposed municipal code cleanup back to the commission. And then we still have the pending item of discussion on insurance requirement for vessels in the harbor. So that's a few things to look forward to. So with that, I'm done.
Can I make a comment, please?
Yep.
Yeah, just regarding the Chumash canoe, I appreciate the public comment as well as the letter that was written and posted to the website. I agree with them in terms of the fee waiver in this case, pretty much just because I think it's a great honor to them as well as looking at the budget for 2020. I mean, I believe this falls under the rents and concessions possibly, but the budget we have for this was 352,000 for 2020, and a fee waiver of $275 for this I think is reasonable. I don't think they're trying to take advantage of the system anyway. I think it's kind of cool actually, the 20-year anniversary of the crossing. And I know that we don't have to take any action or anything, but I do believe that commissioners can make a motion at any point during a meeting. And I would like to make a motion that the waterfront advise city council when they present this to waive the $275 for the Chumash Tomo canoe.
And I would second that motion.
Honorable Chair, members of the commission, I am going to have to advise you that that motion is out of order for tonight based upon this agenda. If you want to put this matter on a future agenda to consider that specific motion, you may do so. But if you were to take action on it tonight, my counsel to you is that it is inconsistent with the listing of this item on the agenda. It's just, that's the way the Brown Act works, and I would change the motion, if you wouldn't mind, to move to put this on a future agenda to do exactly what you just suggested, Commissioner Stanaway.
Great, thank you for the advice, Ms. Henschke. Yes,
Barrett,
Betsy?
Barrett,
go ahead.
I have a question for Mr. Henschke, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. The agenda, our staff report reads, the Waterfront Department is requesting Harbor Commission input on the matter. If Harbor Commission feels a fee waiver is in order, Waterfront staff can work to identify methods to accomplish this. Why isn't that saying that the fee request is on the agenda?
Well, because it's not. It's in the staff report itself. The agenda statement for this item simply says West Beach Canoe Permit, Tomo Canoe Discussion.
Okay.
And so that agenda description, it's the agenda description that controls the action that can be taken.
Okay.
And so the agenda description is just insufficient. That's just the way the Brown Act works.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there further discussion?
Yes, would I be able to make a motion to put that on the agenda then for the September 2021 meeting?
Honorable Chair, members of the commission, if that was directed to me, yes, that is a motion that is totally in order.
Great.
And I will second. All right. Sounds like we're due for a roll call vote.
Yes. Okay, Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sly,
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan,
Aye.
Commissioner Stanowik,
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
and Chair McCray.
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Where are we now?
Yeah,
I have one more, just an issue. I don't need a vote.
Go ahead.
I-
Commissioner Nelson.
I guess I thought can you hear me now?
Breaking up. Is it just my end?
I guess
or-
my own,
We're not hearing you, Mike.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right.
I just want to, since the subcommittees were in fact on the agenda, I'm hoping that a response to my question and suggestion can occur perhaps at the next meeting. In the past, I've tried to do this, and 6 months can go by pretty quickly. If I need to formally put a letter in asking that it be an agenda item, that would be great. But it would just making requests that it be considered as soon as possible.
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson, just from a staff point of view, I'm not overly certain what you were requesting, so it might help if it was written and brought to us, and I can certainly put that on a future agenda.
I am happy to do that.
All right, well, Chairman McCray, I think I'm wrapped up now. Angela's on.
One more person has raised their hand for public comment on the TOML item. May I call on them now before we move on?
Please do.
Thank you. Marcus Lopez, I'm going to call on you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And it appears that you are self-muted at the moment.
Thank you, commissioners and dear Harbor commissioners. I appreciate the time. And a lot of these questions have yet to be determined. I understand that, but we are the captains of the TOML, Reggie Pagaline, setting his band of Chumash Indians, Steve Villa, Barbaran Chumash Tribal Council, myself, and Marcus Victor Arva Lopez, the captains are requesting the site of our TOML in the area next to the Santa Barbara landing is a site for a TOML. And at the same time, our discussions with the harbor operations manager about this matter, we have a dialogue and we appreciate his input. We're requesting that the TOML fees be waived. The archaeological sites, the essence of our TOML, our Chumash maritime culture, all that needs to be understood. This is opportunities that we can do that. We have formed a good relationship in the recent past, and this gesture will go far in the nurturing this relationship and making it stronger going forward. And then if the Harbor Commission agrees to waive the fees, it will be greatly appreciated by the Chumash community across the board. And this is something that is part of, I know, the overall city Truth and Healing Committee that we are establishing in order to reflect where we are at this point in time. We appreciate everybody's concern also about we're different than any other organization because the Chumash people were here before and they were still here. And this is something that the history needs to be reviewed as far as the maritime culture. The villages, which are numerous around the coastal areas, as Mr. Pagalian suggested. I appreciate the time. Thank you very much. My name once again is Marcus Lopez Sr. Thank you very much to all the commissioners.
Thank you very much, Marcus Lopez. I was going to hold back on this comment, but it's just driving me crazy. There was a time when a good friend of mine, a guy who worked for me at one point as a young deckhand, we were just talking and he said to me tongue in cheek, something like, and we were talking about licenses and permits. And he says, oh, that's where the government steals your rights. They take your rights and then they sell them back to you. And I just cannot get it out of my head, especially with respect to the descendants of the original peoples of this land on these beaches. And I hope that ultimately we're able to agree on something that works out well, but I can't see it playing very well in the public eye if somehow we couldn't permit these people to do as their ancestors did before any of our ancestors arrived on these shores. Thank you. And so with that, if there's any other discussion, if there's not any other discussion, we'll move on to the business services report.
So I'm all clear, so we'll turn it over to Brian Fossey for his report.
Good evening, commissioners. In this month's, hello, Mr. Stedman. As part of this month's business services report, I have a brief update on the fiscal year 22 budget approval. And before I get into that, just a little background. The waterfront staff reviewed the fiscal year 2022 budget, including the proposed fee changes with the Harbor Commission Budget Subcommittee on February 11th of this year. And then we took that to the full Harbor Commission on March 18th of this year. City Council then reviewed the Waterfront Department's proposed budget as part of a work session on May the 5th. We then proceeded to the Finance Committee where we reviewed the proposed changes with them, and that took place on May 11th. Big picture, the city's budget was adopted, the entire budget from all departments on June 22nd, and then the city's new schedule of fees was adopted on June 29th. So as part of that schedule of fees, there are a number of changes to various waterfront department fees. Next slide, please. And they are as follows. Our slip rental fee went up by 3% this year, and our live board fee did the same, a 3% increase. Our visitor fee, that is for boats coming in from outside the area, that went up 50 cents per foot to $1.50 for boats, vessels 70 feet and under, and for 70 feet and over, it went from $1.50 to $2 per foot. Our boat impound fee was stuck at a fee that was originated about over 30 years ago, and so we increased that to a more modern amount to the tune of $100. That's a $65 increase. Our slip permittee parking permit was also increased. It was increased by $30 to $125. So now both the slip permittee permit as well as the general permit are both at $125. And lastly, the harbor parking validation program was terminated as of July 1st. I should note that the annual parking permit, that doesn't really go into effect until we start selling the calendar year 2022 permits, which is scheduled for December 1st of this year. So next up, happy to answer any questions about that before I get on to the next slide, if anybody has any. Okay, next slide. This is a shameless plug. At the June meeting, I discussed the fact that the Business Services Division is working with the city's emergency services manager, Yoli McGlinchey, to arrange and conduct a free Community Emergency Response Team training, or CERT training. This is a program that started with the LA Fire Department back in 1985. It then, it was so well received that it's been mimicked all over the nation, and it has been adopted by the federal government as well. So this is a training that if any of our tenants are interested, they please can contact me. But what it is you can take this, you'll learn it here, sure, but this is all around the country. If you end up in Nebraska and there's an emergency, this is the kind of protocols you will be following in the sense of a community emergency. It includes disaster preparedness, fire suppression. You'll get to handle a fire extinguisher. We do medical operations. We do light search and rescue operations. We also do psychology and team organization. There's a course review at the end. And we also have a disaster simulation, which really puts all that knowledge to the test. It's over about 6 or 8 weeks to the tune of about 24 total hours. Again, it is free. So with the next slide, please. If any of our tenants out there are interested, please give me a call. My number's on the slide there, 564-5525, or call the front desk. Doesn't matter. It'll get back to me, or you can email me as well if you are interested. So we'd like to start this up in the next couple months. So folks are out there, please give me a call. And that is this month's business services report.
Are there any questions?
Yes. I'm curious the status of the, I guess we would call it a rent deferral and loan program that you articulated for our tenants, particularly on, I think, Stearns Wharf, and you identified the number of individuals or companies that were participating in that program. What's the status of that at this point?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Nelson, by status, what exactly are you looking for? How many are participating in it? What is the rollout, the payback process?
Is anybody making payments?
Yes, we've had, originally there were 19 folks in it. We are now down to 8.
That's great. So everybody, so everyone is basically now current except for 8 enterprises.
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you. That was
You're
my
welcome.
question.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, so I believe that moves us on to the facilities management report.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Brian Adair, Facilities Manager. Facilities report. Next page, please. I'd like to introduce you to the United Way Work for Good program. United Way, in partnership with the City of Santa Barbara Environmental Services Division, launched their Work for Good pilot program on August 16th, 2021. Pilot program is fully funded by United Way through a local private donor and grants secured by United Way, and it provided work experience for unsure individuals as they work within the waterfront. There's a team of 2 to 4 individuals who will perform various work tasks, such as picking up litter, sweeping, graffiti removal, and light landscaping. The work hours are from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, Monday through Friday, for approximately 4 hours, approximately 4 months. Environmental Services will administer the program, provide cleanup equipment and supplies, and coordinate work projects as part of the partnership. United Way will cover all programmatic expenses, including the $17 per hour wage paid to those workers for United Way. Next slide, please. This is one of the workers that was doing a really good job of cleaning up the Harbor West parking lot, and I really appreciate the help that United Way is offering us, and we're very honored to partner with them. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, as of today, the County Workforce Development Board has made some changes to their program funding. This program will now focus efforts on Pershings Park and Ledbetter Beach to provide more frequent cleaning and sanitizing of park equipment in order to prevent COVID-19 transmission. United Way will resubmit a proposal for the waterfront to continue what we started this week. Any questions? Hello, Betsy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Adair. I don't really have a question, but a comment. I'm glad it's going to be focusing on Ledbetter because I noticed last week when I was there that the parking lot area and the part of the grass along the edge of the parking lot was pretty filthy with broken glass and trash. So I think it really desperately needs a cleanup, regular cleanup. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's as all of our parks and beaches were heavily utilized, and I'll inspect that area tomorrow when there's daylight. Thank you for the comment. That concludes my facilities report. Thank you.
I don't see any further questions. So let's go ahead and move on to the harbor operations report. Mr. Engebretson.
Good evening, Chair McCray and Harbor Commissioners. For the members of the public that don't know who I am, my name is Eric Engebretson and I'm the Operations Manager. And with that, we will get started with our operations report. Next slide, please. The Santa Barbara County Air Pollution Control District is providing grant funding right now to benefit health by cost-effectively replacing old and high-polluting diesel engines with newer and cleaner ones. Next slide, please. Vessels that qualify are non-regulated commercial vessels such as charter fishing, commercial fishing, dredge, tugboats, and regulated commercial vessels. Those vessels that don't qualify at this time are recreational and non-diesel vessels that are not eligible. Next slide, please. The grant runs from, started August 2nd and will end Friday, September 3rd. And for those that are interested, they can get more information at www.ourair.org, grants-for marine vessels-vessels. Next slide, please. So our East Beach mooring program. We are currently wrapping up our permit. It's in the hands of the State Lands Commission. But a little background on this, the East Beach Mooring Program was originally permitted in 2005, and we began issuing permits in 2006. There are 45 designated mooring sites. Each permittee owns and maintains their own mooring tackle and pays the city an annual fee of $250. The city established the program to give boaters another option for keeping their boats moored versus anchored in open waters. Permittees own their moorings and the ground tackle, and those are inspected annually by city-approved inspectors. Next slide, please. Currently, there's 27 available sites with 18 that are currently being used. Next slide, please. So about a year ago, we had some updates and possible changes to the program before we submitted our permit. Due to the decline in permittees, the Harbor Commission considered revisions to the East Beach Mooring Permit Program, which included consolidating the mooring field and possibly not even renewing the lease with the State Lands Commission. The reduction of the mooring field would have resulted in 32 mooring sites, with 18 currently being occupied. Next slide, please. Additionally, due to the decline in the mooring field use, the Waterfront Department also considered alternative uses. Commercial fishermen had expressed an interest in using mooring permit areas seafood product storage. Currently, receivers are often tied up at commercial boat slips and incrementally brought up to market based on the variety of factors such as price, weather, and volumes of catch. Water quality and dissolved oxygen levels within the harbor impact storage opportunities. And because occasional low dissolved oxygen levels are enough to kill seafood products stored in receivers within the harbor, alternative sites for seafood storage were looked at. Next slide, please. So where we are now, as mentioned earlier, staff is currently in the permit renewal process. It's in the hands of the State Lands Commission for mooring only. The Coastal Commission and staff reviewed some of the alternative uses, and we have to do a little bit more research before we move forward with those particular uses as mentioned. Right now, once the permit is renewed within the 10 years, we can add amendments to that permit. Next slide, please. Are there any questions on the slip permit before we head on? Okay, and then just recap to our 20-foot slip lottery. At its May 20th meeting, Harbor Commission conducted a lottery in order to rank the 289 individuals for assignments of 2 available slips. Currently, the slips were 2A213, and that slip was issued on May 25th. Currently, there's a boat in the slip, and the permit is considered final. 2A212, we have a permittee who is ranked number 3 in the lottery, and he is currently looking for a boat. He has 90 days, and that expires on October 25th. So until then, this permit is not considered final. Next slide, please. 2A212, again, until that vessel is placed in the slip, it is not final, and after which time it will go to the next person on the lottery list. And that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Ingridson, I have a comment regarding the slip lottery process. I just want to give some recognition to Angela Rodriguez and Jeanette Brzezinski, and that they spent a good bit of effort to get a process for those 300 applicants that would be efficient and transparent. And they found and worked with and figured out how to use a free software product that randomized the drawing process. And I think it was transparent. I think it was well accepted by the 300 people, and hopefully can be used again the next time we have a lottery. And I just wanted us to recognize that they did what I thought was above and beyond normal effort to make their work. It worked out really well. So thanks to them.
Well, thank you for the recognition. Yes, their participation was outstanding. You couldn't have done it without them.
So was the process just to go down who was first on the list and second and third, or was it randomized and selected out of as a random selection? I'm a little confused there.
It was randomized, and then it ordered with a random number generator. I guess it ordered them from 1 to 289 because we didn't know how far we'd have to go down the list to get acceptance. So it just did the whole list, and but it was basically kind of a random number generator that took all those entries and shuffled them real well and put them in a random order.
Yeah, but
first to last.
Doesn't the wait list work where the first person on it gets the next slip and second person on gets the next slip and so forth? Or every time we have this, do you take all the people on the wait list and randomize them?
I'd like to ask Mr. Ingebrigtsen to respond to that.
Great. Chair Sloan, yeah, we did exhaust, those slips were presented to the waiting list, and no one on the waiting list wanted to take those. So that's when we went to the lottery.
You're right. I forgot. I apologize. Yeah. Okay. I get it now. Thank you.
Of course.
And then I have a final question with respect to the use of the anchorage area, the mooring area, potentially for seafood storage. Do we know what the water quality is out there yet? It occurs to me that we have an outflow from a stream, and we know that every time we get a rainstorm, not that we ever seem to get a decent one, but a rainstorm that causes an outflow like that, it brings with it a lot of terrestrial bad organisms that can cause our seafoods to fail the test.
Chair McCray, yes, that was one question that was brought up by the Coastal Commission. Exactly how much more water quality testing we were going to conduct in those areas, specifically farther to the east corner, and some of the drainage from both the bird refuge and I believe Sycamore Creek. So those were areas that we haven't visited yet, but are probably areas we would start conducting more water quality monitoring.
Thank you. Sounds good. All right, so I guess we'll move on to new business, and it looks like we have a couple of leases to potentially forward to the City Council.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Sorry, Angela, I was going back too far. I thought you were going to read what the action item is. My bad. Okay. I have two leases for you to consider this evening. The first is a proposed office lease with the Santa Barbara Fish Market. Santa Barbara Fish Market has leased office space from the Waterfront Department since June of 2012, when they were chosen by the Harbor Commission and then approved by City Council through a competitive request for proposal process. Next slide, please. The Fish Market office occupies 734 square feet that houses their administrative and clerical operations related to their retail space across the way at 117A Harbor Way. As you can see here, here's the site plan. They are located immediately across the hall from us here at the Waterfront Department. Next slide, please. The proposed lease terms include 1 5-year term, a base rent of $282,862.60 per month. The permitted use is for a business office for professional and clerical matters, and they are also subject to a cost of living increase based on the consumer price index. And that is the proposed lease before you this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. They are a tenant in good standing and they have no lease compliance problems on file.
And do we have any questions?
This is a renewal, I think. Could you tell us what the, if you have it there in front of you, what the last rent was prior to this renewal, and what percentage increase the 2862 would be over the prior year?
Sure. Chair McCray, Commissioner Sly, I do have that information. They currently pay a little over $2,500 per month. This new rate at $2,862.60 is nearly a $345 per month increase, a 14% increase. And we needed to bring them up to snuff with other more recent office leases. So that is what we did, and they were accepting of that, and that's what's before you today.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there further questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I'd move to accept the proposed lease terms and forward to council.
I'll second that.
I would second.
Very good. Commissioner Sloan, do you wish to speak to your motion at all? I gather not. So let's have ourselves a roll call vote and see how we do.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sly,
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan,
Aye.
Commissioner Stanwyck,
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer,
Aye.
and Chair McCray.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so that moves us along to the next proposed lease agreement.
Okay, the second and final lease agreement on your agenda this evening is for Sushi Go Go. Next slide, please. Mr. Chris Kim has operated Sushi Go Go since acquiring the business via lease assignment process back in 2012. Sushi Go Go is a staple of our waterfront community. It's a 198 square foot restaurant space located at 119B Harbor Way. This is truly one of our best success stories. Mr. Kim, since assuming ownership, has increased the annual revenues at Sushi Go Go from just over $240,000 a year to nearly $900,000 in calendar year 2020. And please keep in mind, 9 of those months in 2020 were very COVID-heavy months. We're expecting even more from him in the current calendar year, 21. Again, a true success. And not only have the revenues gone up substantially, almost 4 times, the subsequent rent payments to the city have also gone from about $27,600 in 2011 to over $100,000 per year in 2020. Next slide, please. The proposed lease terms include a 5-year term with 1 5-year option. The base rent is $800 per month. Obviously, Mr. Kim is every month in the percentage rent, which happens to be 11.4% of the tenant's gross receipts. The business is also subject to annual cost of living increases based on the consumer price index. Mr. Kim and Sushi Go Go are considered a tenant in good standing by the department. They have no outstanding default notices, and they have been always prompt with their rent payments. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission might have.
Yeah, I have a question just regarding the rent and the percentage rent. I'm just a little bit confused in terms of the differences because the fish market, the one that we just proposed, just pays the base rent. And in like the prior meeting in June, we had voted on Brophy Brothers, and they had a base rent and 10% of gross sales. And Sushi Go-Go now has a base rent and a percentage rent of 11.4%. And I'm just kind of a little bit confused on just the disparity between them because they seem to me like they're pretty much very similar businesses. I'm just wondering why the percentage rents would really be different between like Brophy's or Sushi Go-Go, like in an extra percentage terms, and how we determine that.
Chair McCray, Commissioner Stanwyck, they are similar actually. So what it is with Sushi Go-Go, they're 11.4% straight across the board. And this has to do a lot with scale of operation. You have 198 square feet versus an entire upstairs, downstairs, as well as on the alley for Brophy's. Brophy's is 10% up to, I believe it's $3 million, and then in revenue, and then from $3 million up, they pay 11.4%. As you can imagine, they get to that $3 million pretty darn quick. So they spend the majority of their year paying 11.4%. So in that sense, 11.4, 11.4, they are same. However, they are the same. However, vastly different as far as scale is considered of restaurant.
Okay,
Does
great.
that help?
To me that
Yeah, thanks
we're
for the
talking
clarification.
about an office space, right? That doesn't do sales with respect to the fish market.
I think Mr. Stanwyck was referring to their retail operation down the way. Maybe I'm wrong. The lease you folks just recommended was an office lease. They also have a retail lease with us as well for the fish
Okay.
market. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, that makes sense. Got
Yeah.
it.
Great, thank you.
My
Thanks.
pleasure.
Mr. Bossi, before we leave this, I don't think I need to ask my question about prior level of base rent on this one, but why is there a need for granting an option on this renewal for someone who's been in business here for a number of years?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Slide, granting an option. This is a brand new lease. This with a 5-year initial term and a 5-year option. So are you wondering why we included an additional 5-year option after the initial? Is that the question?
Right, as opposed to just a straight lease term.
Well, this kind of gets back to one of Commissioner Nelson's comments on the economy. If something happens, when you put a 5-year initial with a 5-year option, it allows at that 5-year point, if this particular tenant wants out, then that's an opportunity. If along those lines, in legal terms, as far as the city attorney's office sees it, this is essentially a 10-year lease, and we do require an ordinance that goes along with this to city council. So a 5-year initial and a 5-year option is pretty standard for us when it comes to restaurant leases and the amount of capital that they're required to put in to their continual operation.
Okay, but this gentleman's been here for some number of years already with his equipment in there, hasn't he?
He's been there, as I stated in the intro, since 2012.
Okay, thanks. Just curious.
Are there any further questions?
Does this lease require any further improvements to the space, either by him or by us?
Chair McCray, Commissioner Sloan, in the sense of if there are requirements needed by environmental health through the county, that would be on the owner. Mr. Kim did about 3 years ago do a number of interior improvements, based on space requirements, dishwashers, fryers, and things of that nature. So he did invest considerable income into that. But he's responsible for the interior of the building. We're responsible for the exterior. If he has things proposed for the interior, I'm not currently aware of them. Again, small space. So I think he's kind of dialed in at this particular moment.
Okay, great, thank you.
Are there further questions? So with that, I'd entertain a motion
Make a motion to approve.
and a second.
Second,
We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Stanwyck, would you like to speak to your motion at all? I am gathering.
No, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I think it's a great business. Yeah, I'm a client and I think they do great business and serve good quality food.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion? And with that, Ms. Rodriguez, would you honor us with a roll call vote?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Sly,
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan,
aye.
Commissioner Stanwyck.
Aye.
Commissioner Stedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yes,
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
and Chair McCray.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That moves us, I believe, along to requests from the public. And it appears that we have an appeal of the denial of a waiver of termination of a slip permit 1Q001 by Mr. Jerry Borisi. Do we have staff to tell us a little bit about this matter?
Yeah, Harbor Commissioner.
Excuse me, Mike, Honorable Chair, members of the commission, before you start the hearing, there's some procedural items that we need to go through first. And I sent out a script for the chair. I don't know if you have that, Chair McCray, but if you would like, I can read through that script before we start having any staff presentation on this matter, if that would be okay with you.
Shouldn't we hear the motion first before we do that?
I'm sorry, what?
Shouldn't we hear the item? Shouldn't we read through the agenda item first, so we know what we're talking about?
Okay. That's very good. I apologize. I'm not completely familiar with the commission procedures, but before we open the hearing, we need to go through some of the preliminary matters.
Understand.
Hey, Angela, do you mind putting the recommendation on the screen? And we may as well even just have you read it so that we know where it's a good starting point. I think it's the third slide of this presentation should be it.
Okay, we're working on getting that one up right now. And then in the meantime, I will go ahead and read it. So item number 9, appeal of denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001, Mr. Jerry Borisi. Recommendation that Harbor Commission consider the appeal of the Waterfront Director's denial of the appellant, Mr. Jerry Borisi's request for waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001 in the Santa Barbara Harbor and take action to either A, uphold the Waterfront Director's denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001 and reject the appeal, or B, overturn the Waterfront Director's denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001 and grant the appeal.
So now, Dan,
Go ahead.
Mr. Henschke, do you want to give an intro now?
Yeah, I think that it's important that we do this right now. And Chairman McCray, if you don't mind, I'm going to just go through the script that I had provided. First of all, I want to give a brief introduction on how the commission will handle this matter, because it's a special type of appeal hearing that is different from your normal role as an advisory agency. In this matter, the commission acts as a quasi judicial body. The commission's decision must be based upon the evidence presented to it in connection with this appeal hearing. And the commission's decision on this appeal is final, subject only to judicial review. We have some rules for the hearing. Although this is an evidentiary hearing, the commission will not be following the evidentiary rules applicable to a judicial proceeding. The commission may consider any evidence that a reasonable person is accustomed to relying upon in the conduct of serious affairs. The order of the hearing will be as follows. First, staff will be allowed 20 minutes for its presentation. Staff may reserve time, and if they do reserve time, it will be added on to the 3 minutes that they get as their concluding comments. Following the staff presentation, the commission members may ask questions of staff. Following the questions by the commissioners of staff, the appellant will be allowed 20 minutes for the appellant's presentation. If the appellant reserves time, the reserved time will be added to the appellant's closing time at 3 minutes. Following the appellant's presentation, the commission members may ask questions of the appellant. There will be an opportunity for members of the public to comment. Members of the public will be allowed 2 minutes to present their testimony. Following the public comments, staff and the appellant will each have 3 minutes plus any reserved time to make and present a rebuttal and make any concluding comments. Because this is an evidentiary hearing, the commissioners are required to disclose any substantial information or contacts concerning the appeal that they received outside of tonight's hearing. If any commissioner did talk to anybody about the substance of the hearing, about any of the evidentiary matters, you should state for the record the nature of that communication, the person to whom you spoke, and a brief statement of whatever that communication related to. The reason that we do this is that it gives the staff and the applicant an opportunity to offer any rebuttal to anything that any commissioner might have heard outside of the hearing. And that basically creates a level playing field for everyone. And so what at this time, Chair, I would ask that you request any of the commissioners to disclose whether there has been any ex parte communication.
Fellow commissioners, has there been any ex parte communication that you've received with respect to this agenda item? I see none.
That being the case, I would just like to note for the record that all of the information that was contained in your agenda packet and provided as part of the agenda packet is part of what we call the record of the proceeding tonight, and is all evidence upon which you may make your decision, as well as anything else that is presented to you or heard by you tonight. And now, Chair, I will be quiet and turn it back over to you to conduct the rest of the meeting.
Thank you very much, and feel free to interject and set me on the right path and us on the right path here, so we don't make a mess of this, or make as little mess as possible. So with that, it seems that we're on to the staff presentation, and they'll have 20 minutes.
All right. Again, so I'll start on the slide that we're on right now, and thank you, Mr. Henschke. And so just by way of introduction, because this is a little different than a usual item that we'd be presenting, and there is some legal representation. So I just want to take a minute and clarify who we have present today. So we have online Ms. Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney. And so she is present and will be representing the Waterfront Department and has done so through the process thus far. And you've already seen Mr. Dan Henschke, Assistant City Attorney. So he's present and he'll be representing the Harbor Commission. So he's kind of representing your legal side. And then we also have Mr. Michael Damon with Brighton Powell, and he's present and will be representing the appellant, Mr. Jerry Borisi. So, and of course, myself, Mike Wiltshire, I'm Waterfront Director, and I'll be leading this presentation for the waterfront. And additionally, I believe we do have a court reporter who is signed in, and this is really just so that there is an official transcript of the meeting that can be used down the road if needed. So with that, I'll move into the next slide, Angela. Let's go to the next slide as we already read that recommendation. So really, as a high-level summary of the waterfront stance and why we're here today, so this appeal process really stems from the waterfront's decision to terminate slip permit 1Q1 effective June 11th of this year. The reasoning is an unlawful sublicense of the slip permit, which is in direct violation of Santa Barbara Municipal Code and the slip permit rules and regulations. Next slide, Angela. So this slide shows the detailed timeline outlining the slip termination process to date. So in early April of 2021, the Waterfront Department was made aware of a situation of an unlawful sublicense involving slip 1Q1, and that's when the slip termination process was initiated. On May 11th, the Waterfront Department issued a 30-day notice to terminate the slip to permit the slip permit to slip permittee Jerry Borisi. That notice was sent. On June 21st, the Waterfront Department received back a request for waiver of termination. And this was a request to myself, Waterfront Director, from the Office of Brighton Powell, who is representing the slip permittee Jerry Borisi. On July 16th, so the Waterfront Director, myself, issued a denial of this waiver request to Brighton Powell. Shortly after, on July 26th, the Waterfront Department and the City Clerk's Office received an appeal of my denial from the Office of Brighton Powell. And that's what brings us to today. So per municipal code, the appeal process allows the appellant to bring this item in front of the Harbor Commission. And as Mr. Henschke mentioned, the Harbor Commission's decision on this is ultimately final. Next slide. So just a little bit of background on slip permits. I know most of the Harbor Commission is pretty well versed on our Muni Code and slip permits. So a reminder that slip permits in the Santa Barbara Harbor are really revocable month-to-month licenses. So the terms and rules and regulations pertaining to slip permits, they're outlined in our municipal code, Title 17, as well as in the slip permit rules and regulations. And something to know that these terms of the slip permit, they're provided to and acknowledged by any slip permittee at the time of issuance. So these are rules and regulations that are essentially signed off at the time of accepting a slip permit. Next slide. For a little more background on our process as the Waterfront Department. So slip permits is part of the Waterfront Department's duties and really a part of our obligations to enforce Santa Barbara Municipal Code and the slip permit rules and regulations. So as such, these permits can be terminated for failing to comply with municipal code and the rules and regulations. Really, slip termination is one of the Waterfront's main forms of recourse against misuse and violations of slip permit rules and regulations. Per municipal code, so Harbor Commission, yourselves are a key part of this process and really a part of every appealed slip termination. And again, your decision is final. Next slide. So now a little bit of background on this particular slip and this particular termination. So I'll start with the background and history of slip 1Q1 and the sole slip permittee, Jerry Borisi. So Mr. Borisi was assigned this slip permit for 1Q1 from the wait list in 1999. So slip 1Q1 is a 50-foot slip. Between 1999 and 2008, Mr. Borisi had various vessels in slip 1Q1. Then in 2008, Mr. Borisi put a new vessel in the slip, and the current slip permit was issued to Jerry Borisi as the sole slip permittee for the vessel Varuna. At the time and now, Mr. Borisi held a 1% interest in the vessel Varuna and was the only registered slip permittee. Next slide. So in April 2021, so the Waterfront Department was made aware of an existing sublicense agreement between sole slip permittee Jerry Borisi and a non-slip permittee Leslie James. As it turns out, this sublicense agreement has existed since 2008 when Mr. Borisi initially received the slip permit for the vessel Varuna. So this agreement between the two was in direct violation of municipal code and the slip permit rules and regulations. And so really upon being made aware of this, the Waterfront Department was obligated to take action, and that's when this slip termination process was initiated. Next slide. So I'd like to cover a little bit of background on exactly how the Waterfront Department was made aware of the agreement between Mr. Borisi and Mr. James. So in early 2021, slip permittee Borisi contacted the Waterfront Department seeking assistance in removing the vessel Varuna and Mr. James from slip 1Q1. Upon inspection, this was really odd, as Mr. Borisi was the sole slip permittee and an owner of the vessel Varuna. And so he should have full right to move and operate and remove the vessel on his own. At this time, the Waterfront Department advised Mr. Borisi that he's both the sole slip permittee and a registered vessel owner and should and can move the vessel on his own. Shortly after the contact with Mr. Borisi, non-slip permittee Leslie James contacted the Waterfront Department seeking assistance to enforce his rights to occupy slip 1Q1. This was also a bit odd, as Leslie James was not a registered slip permittee and really should not have rights afforded to him as a slip permittee. So at this time is when Leslie James provided to the Waterfront Department a copy of the unlawful sublicense agreement, along with some other documentation outlining the terms of their agreement between Mr. Borisi and Mr. James. And so with this information, the Waterfront Department again was obligated to take action. And just a side note, all of this documentation is available in the staff report that went out to Harbor Commission last week. Next slide. So during the contact with non-slip permittee James, here's a kind of a list of the documentation that was provided to the Waterfront Department. So first and foremost was this contract for 1Q1 slip partnership, as mentioned previously. But additionally, Mr. James, the non-slip permittee, provided the Waterfront Department with an unsecured property tax statement showing kind of notations that Mr. James was in fact paying the possessory interest tax for the slip. Also provided a handwritten termination notice from the slip permittee, Jerry Borisi, to the non-slip permittee, kind of declaring their contract breached and terminated for failure to pay fees. And additionally, he provided a text message from slip permittee Borisi to non-slip permittee James, confirming that the contract was terminated despite receiving late payment. Next slide. So now I'm just going to take a quick minute and unpack some of the terms of the sublicense agreement that was set up between Borisi and James. I think it's kind of a big portion of this. So first and foremost, this agreement has been in place and acted upon and really recognized by both parties since 2008. So this potentially indicates that the sole slip permittee, Jerry Borisi, has not utilized the slip permit or vessel since it was originally acquired. This contract is really an external arrangement between these two parties and is not recognized by the Waterfront Department. When we were provided, it was the first time that we'd seen this document. The contract lays out pretty clear terms indicative of a sublicense agreement. So this includes the fact that the non-slip permittee James has the right to occupy the slip. The non-slip permittee James is required to comply with all the terms and conditions of the permit. And along with that is required to pay all the fees by the 15th each month directly to slip permittee Boracy, along with a security deposit. The non-slip permittee is also required to pay all associated costs, possessory interest tax, late fees, etc. And the contract does require slip permittee Boracy to maintain a 1% ownership in the vessel Varuna. And this is really in order to maintain slip permit eligibility, but it also prohibits the use of the vessel for the slip permittee. And just to get into the nuance here, I want to be really clear that the waterfront does allow and recognize vessel partnerships. There are many cases throughout the harbor where there are multiple owners to a single vessel. Vessel partnerships do not remove the requirement of being a slip permittee. And additionally, this contract is not simply a vessel partnership agreement. The majority of this contract pertains to use of the slip itself, not the vessel. There are really only two provisions pertaining to the vessel itself in the entire agreement. One which obligated the non-slip permittee to comply with vessel rules in the harbor, and a second provision which prohibited Boracy, who is the sole slip permittee and part vessel owner, from even using or operating the vessel at all. So really this contract shows a really clear agreement between Boracy and James, the non-slip permittee, and afforded all the rights of the slip permittee to the renter while still maintaining his status as a slip permittee. Next slide. All right, so this is my closing slide and really our summary of the slip permit termination. So from the documentation provided, it's apparent that the slip permittee, Jerry Boracy, allowed the non-slip permittee, Leslie James, to occupy the slip 1Q1 and assume all the rights of that slip, and required him to pay fees and all other associated costs. So this agreement's been in place and acted upon by both parties since 2008. So it's been going on for significantly a long amount of time. And this really is in clear violation of our Muni Code and the slip permit rules and regulations. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Harbor Commission for any other questions, and note that I suppose I'll reserve any additional time for our rebuttal. But that was our side of it. So I'll turn it back to Harbor Commission now for any questions on this.
I have a question. I have a question for Mr. Henschke, Attorney Henschke. Dan, what was the intent of Mr. James providing the documents to the Waterfront Department? What event triggered that?
Honorable Chair, I couldn't quite tell which commissioner was. Is that Commissioner Stedman? Were you asking that question? Oh, thank you. Commissioner Stedman, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe the representative of one of the parties would know the answer to that, but Mr. James is not a witness, and I don't know. Maybe
Okay,
maybe,
well,
maybe
asking,
Ms. Connect can answer.
Yeah,
My
I'm asking
role
you so
tonight-
that
I'm
you
sorry,
can pose the question for us, Attorney Henschke.
I'm sorry, what?
Commissioner Stedman, I'm happy to answer that if it's appropriate.
Please.
And I may have glazed over it a little bit. And so the sole slip permittee, Boracy, contacted the Waterfront Department looking for assistance to essentially remove the vessel Varuna and tenant James from the slip. And so after that occurred, Mr. James, who is the non-slip holder, approached the Waterfront looking for support in enforcing this sort of side contract agreement. And so Mr. James felt that he should be afforded rights to the slip based on the agreement that he had with Mr. Boracy. And so he provided that documentation to the waterfront department, essentially looking for our support to enforce their partnership or sub-license agreement that was an outside document that was not, we did not recognize that document. So that's how that transpired. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And you remind me that it was in the brief that you provided us. So thank you for reiterating that. Do we know who created the agreement between James and Boracy?
Yeah, Commissioner Stedman, the contract itself was created by a broker in the harbor, Peter Crane.
Do we know, are there other agreements like this out there? Do we know of any other agreements like this out there? Or is this the first time we've seen this type of agreement? Because we kind of got it serendipitously.
Yeah, Commissioner Sloan, good question. Speaking personally for myself and for waterfront staff, from what I've been informed of, we're not aware of that. We were presented this document, and that's what we're acting on.
Okay. And then my other question is, Mr. Wiltshire, I appreciate your summary of everything and your position on it, but could we get one of the two city attorneys to give us their legal opinion on this?
Commissioner McCray, I'm not quite sure who was asking that question. Could you?
I'm sorry, I was.
Oh, Commissioner Sloan, was that you?
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay. Okay, so this is Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney representing the Waterfront Department. And my opinion is reflected in the report prepared by the department. So if that answers your question, I've been assisting them all along in this process, and my opinion on this is represented in the report.
Okay, so you feel that...
I would concur that this would represent a sub-license agreement. I think that there's plenty of indicia in this contract of it being a sub-license agreement.
How long, do we know how long Mr. Peter Crane has been a broker in our harbor?
Commissioner Stebbin, I don't know that that is an issue that is relevant to this discussion now, and I'm not sure that anyone, I'm not sure that staff is aware of that fact.
Okay. My question is regarding the listing of owners on a slip permit. My question is, it appears that all owners are not required to be on a slip permit. But go ahead. But those that are listed on a permit may not enter into a sub-license agreement. So my confusion is that if Mr. James was in fact listed on the slip permit, added to the slip permit, would the contract that is a sub-license have been an issue at all?
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. If I could answer that question. So if you look at the slip permit, so in fact, the process of the Waterfront Department is to list on the slip permit the vessel owners. So I think that that's maybe what you're referring to. He is listed on the slip permit as a vessel owner only. So he's not listed on the slip permit as a slip permittee. But if Mr. James were a slip permittee along with Mr. Boracy, this would not be an issue. You're correct.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Wilshire, is that the only thing that would have had to be different about this contract to put it in conformance with the city code and harbor rules is to have both owners listed, or looking at it maybe from the other side, where there are multiple owners, what is the typical arrangement with regard to who's listed and so forth? I'm confused as to why. Is it a question of Mr. James just not being listed that caused this to be a sub-licensing agreement?
Yeah, Commissioner Sly, I can take a crack at that, and of course, Sarah hop in. The waterfront is not necessarily privy to vessel partnership agreements. I'd assume that a vessel partnership agreement would be pertaining to a vessel. In this case, it is kind of a clear case where a sole slip permittee has a little bit more than a vessel partnership agreement. The agreement that is in front of you and the contract for partnership is really is laying out the terms of rights to the slip. And so Mr. Borisi is really has a contract with Mr. James to basically forego his rights to the slip and allow a non-slip permittee rights to a slip that he's not permitted to use.
And if I could add, I am not, privy to the reasons why two parties would enter into this kind of a contract. Mr. Borisi did get this 50-foot slip off the wait list. And he's had it since 1999. He's gone through several iterations of vessels in the slip. And since 2008, he's had this one vessel in there, the Varuna, and had this agreement with Mr. James in place since that time. At any point during that time, he could have added Mr. James to his slip permit, and this then would not have been an issue. But the facts of this contract, indicate that Mr. James had all of the responsibility for the slip permit. He was paying all of the fees, including the possessory interest tax. He was responsible to comply with all the rules and regulations, and even up to the point that if Mr. James did something that caused Mr. Borisi to lose the slip permit, that Mr. James purportedly indemnifies Mr. Borisi for the value of the slip permit on the fair market value of the slip permit. And an interesting part of this too is it does provide that if Mr. Borisi trades slips and gets another 50-foot slip, this contract goes along with that. So Mr. James is entitled essentially to that slip permit. So that, that's a pretty interesting thing. And that, to me is really kind of clear that this is not a vessel partnership. This is a slip permit partnership.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Commissioner Sly, one key point of this contract is it lays out terms of payment. And so it's really putting Mr. Borisi in control of dictating terms of payment of the slip. And so that really kind of is pretty integral to it being a sub-license agreement.
Do you have further questions? I have one. Did it appear that Mr. Borisi was getting some kind of benefit from this arrangement? Was he being paid in addition to having his obligations for that slip taken care of?
Commissioner McCray, there's nothing in the contract that indicates that he was getting additional compensation under this contract. We don't know if there was an additional contract outside of this. However, under our municipal code, it provides that a sublicense is unlawful whether compensation is received or not. So that is not a determinative factor to indicate whether or not it's a violation of the municipal code.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Gray, one addition, as far as a benefit goes, and it may not be a direct benefit, but Mr. Borsi did receive the slip off the wait list. So it is essentially a way to maintain possession of a slip permit without being financially responsible for it for a period of time, for a fairly long period of time.
Thank you.
Do we know how many times Mr. James paid the possessory interest tax?
We only have the record of the 1 year, but under the contract, he was obligated to pay it every year. So we can assume he paid it every year, but we don't have a fact to support that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. In regards to the Muni Code, has there been any amendments to the Muni Code since they entered into this agreement in 2008, or has it always been the same clause and verbiage as it is currently?
I'll turn that one over to Assistant Attorney Connect.
I'm just wondering if they entered into that agreement, with the same wording as it is currently, or if there's been any changes, or did they enter into this agreement knowing that the assignment of the slip to another non-slip permittee basically is a sublicense like this is basically prohibited, or if there's been any kind of changes
Right.
over the last 13 years?
What I can say to that is, I don't know definitively that this particular section of the municipal code hasn't changed. I don't believe that it has since 2008. I've been working for the city of Santa Barbara and representing the waterfront since 2004. So I would probably remember if this section had changed, and I don't think it has. So I think this has been in place since 2008. But I also know that this particular violation has been part of the rules and regulations that govern slip permits in the slip permit since 1999. And he has signed on to that provision in his slip permit since then. So it has been a law that he has known about since 1999, since he had his first slip permit. It's been in the rules and regulations. So, and also one more point to that too. The slip permits do provide that, you as a slip permittee agree to abide by all the existing rules and the rules that come into place in the future. So even if it wasn't, he'd still be obligated to comply. But I'm almost positive.
Great, thank you.
Further questions? All right. I guess we'll move on to Mr. Michael B. Damon from Brighton Powell.
Thank you. As this been described, Mr. Morrissey has been a slip permittee for more than 21 years, and there's been no prior incident, been no prior issues. He entered into a vessel partnership, not a slip permit partnership, with Leslie James in 2008. And this was well known to the city. They requested proof of ownership. They were provided with proof of ownership of a bill of sale showing that 1% was going to be retained by Mr. Morrissey and 99% by Mr. James. This is standard procedure in the harbor. This is arranged by Peter Crane, who's been a broker in the harbor, and I can tell you, for decades in the harbor. The city had no objection to Mr. Morrissey being a 1% owner. They even referred to James on the permit as an owner and mentioned that he was a boat partner. They acknowledged that he was a partner. They knew he was a 99% partner. And they required nothing else. They required no partnership agreements, no details. They were shown the bill of sale. They rubber stamped it and created a 3-page slip permit that had Mr. James's name on there and the Varuna on there. And that's essential to understand that this is not some sort of subleasing arrangement to some third party with a different boat that Mr. Barassi didn't own. He owned this boat since 2008. He's on the permit. He was allowed to have this boat in that slip per city rules and regulations. There was eventually a problem though with him and his partner. They had a falling out. That's undeniable. He turned to the city for help, and ordinarily the city would say, well, if you don't want that boat in there, fill out this slip permit change request form and you can bring in a new boat. Well, they didn't tell him to do that. They said, well, if you don't like him there, why don't you bring us these forms? And he said, okay. And he brought in the forms and they said, okay, well, now we're going to terminate your slip. He was befuddled and confused and sought us out. It is true that the code specifically authorizes partnerships, vessel partnerships. It's right in the code. It's also true that there's nothing in the code that details what the parameters of these partnerships should be and what they can and can't allow in terms of their internal organizations. It is frankly none of the city's business, really, what the partners have in terms of their arrangements with each other, whether it's reduced to writing in a written partnership agreement or whether it's an oral partnership agreement, which frankly happens all the time. Interestingly enough, the city took action in this case based on an unsigned contract. They were provided with an unsigned contract and decided that that somehow justified terminating Mr. Barassi's rights as a 21-year slip permittee. And these are not insubstantial rights, by the way. As the city and as the Harbor Commission knows full well, these slips are bought and sold. We call them transfers. We talk about paying transfer fees. You have to create a partnership to do that. I've been doing this for 30 years. You set up a partnership, you transfer the interest, and somebody gets paid at the end of the day. You call it a buyout. You have terms that address the city's requirements. But at the end of the day, people buy and sell these slips all the time. And this slip's worth $250,000. So this is not an insubstantial problem. And the idea that somehow we should have added Mr. James to the permit, to a permit that had a market value of perhaps $250,000, to give him that sort of an interest in something he had no right to have an interest in. And we're cavalierly talking about this being a sub-license agreement. There is no sub-license agreement. There's an unsigned contract that makes mention of an allocation of costs and expenses in connection with a vessel that is assigned to this slip, that is held in ownership by a slip permittee of over 21 years. I think that's being lost in all of this. The city has brought up some issues in their paperwork that was submitted for today's hearing. I'll try to address that in chronological order. They admit that the slip termination was based solely upon a finding that there was a, quote, unlawful sublicense. But there was no sublicense. I mean, California law is clear. A sublicense is defined, and we provided you with the authority in the appeal. A sublicense is defined as a license granting a portion or all of the rights that are granted to the licensee under an original license. Well, nobody was ever granted a portion of these rights. Mr. Barassi retained these rights at all time. As the city likes to point out, Mr. James never had any rights to the permit, wasn't given any rights to the permit. There was never any effort to make him a permittee. In fact, Mr. Barassi didn't want him on the permit. And so this idea that there's an illegal sublicense is refuted by the meaning of the word sublicense. He just simply Morrissey just simply allocated a portion of his obligations. He didn't give away his rights. He allocated his obligations to Mr. James in connection with their joint ownership of the vessel. You can do that. You can allocate responsibilities amongst the partners to a boat, to a house, to a car, to a business. You can allocate obligations. And there is nothing in the code that prevents this sort of partnership agreement. And the city doesn't even require you to provide these partnership agreements because there's nothing to review. The permittee had an ownership interest in the boat, in his slip, and the name of the other owner was provided to the city, who knew full well of these 1% ownership interests. The city has two code sections that they seem to rely on. One is saying you got to follow the rules. Well, the only rule they say we didn't follow was the rule regarding sublicensing. Well, there is no rule regarding sublicensing. There's a rule that says you cannot rent the slip permit to any other person or entity. Had he allowed a friend's boat to come into the slip, hey, Johnny, I'm out of town. You can bring in your, your boat and keep it here for a week. Harbor won't notice. No big deal. It'll be a good place for you to keep your boat. Well, that's a violation. If he lets somebody use the slip that's assigned to him and his boat be used by somebody else, but that's not what happened here. He didn't let someone else bring in their boat. He let his boat be in the slip. And he allowed the other owner of his boat to use the boat that he was allowed to keep in his slip. That's what happened. And so that's not a violation of the prohibition against renting the slip permit. He didn't rent the slip permit. He didn't even rent the slip. It's his boat. We also acknowledge that the rules provide that slips may not be loaned or subleased. That's the only other code section they point to. He's not loaning the slip to somebody else. He's not subleasing it to somebody else. He's putting his boat there. Now, you can argue about whether these are good rules to have. You can argue about whether we should allow vessel partnerships of only a 1% nominal interest. You can argue about whether there should be more detail in the code about what can and cannot happen in connection with these vessel partnerships. And then you can pass code changes that reflect those concerns. But there's nothing in the code that addresses this. And if you look at the legal meaning of the word sublicense, which deals with the granting of rights, and acknowledge that what happened here was the allocation of obligations, you can see that there's nothing here. And it would be a shame to have this go through the courts, which, God forbid you guys don't overturn the denial, and have this take up the court's time. Then we have to look into all the other deals. Then I got to bring up the fact that Scott Reedman allowed the same sort of situation back in 2017 with the same sort of agreement drafted by the same broker, and nobody lost the slip there because there's no reason to take it away. The other thing that the waterfront department brings up is the sections of the agreement that they say show the intent to enter into a sublicense. Well, they're trying to come up with intent when the express language of the unsigned agreement that was presented to them doesn't say anything about sublicensing. It talks about vessel expense allocations. And to say that paying the berthing expenses or the property taxes in connection with a boat aren't boat related is to set aside all, hundreds of years of maritime law. These are all clearly related to a vessel and, the necessaries that you have in connection with the vessel. That's Maritime Law 101. They point to Section 3 and they say, James vessel owner agrees to perform the Barassi slip obligations again, the actual agreement says he's to perform the vessel owner's obligation, broadly speaking, not specifically in connection of the slip. And again, it's the obligations, not any assignment of rights. They also point to Section 4 and they say, oh, you know, this says he has to follow all the rules. Well, yes, it was important that if he's going to have a vessel partner, and if that boat that the city allowed to have in the slip, on which James would be, that James would make sure he followed the rules. That he put that in the contract. Peter Crane put it in the contract, and it made sense. I put it in my contracts. You want your partners following the rules. He's a part owner of that boat. It may be primarily used by James, but he's a part owner. He was on the boat. He's used the boat, but he doesn't have to. There's nothing requiring boat owners to do that. The city also relies on Section 5 and says, oh, the fact that he's paying fees on behalf of Barcy show that this is a illegal sublicense. I'm here to tell you, it is often the case that the actual slip permittee isn't the one paying the bills. I mean, this happens all the time. You got, you know, LLCs set up, you have your various arrangements. Certain people are paying the slip fees, some people aren't. There's nothing in the code that says if you start paying the slip fees for your vessel partner, you've somehow taken an assignment of the slip permit. No, you just allocated expenses. There's nothing in the code that governs these partnerships and how they allocate vessel expenses. The city also wants to focus on the fact that there's other fees paid. The same argument. You're allocating expenses to the other vessel owner. Section 6 that they point to, it just confirms that Barcy, as the part owner of the vessel, can allocate certain expenses. And this they say is important. And that if James fails to meet those obligations as a vessel partner, that Barcy can take action, that he has legal remedies if his vessel partner doesn't do what he's supposed to do. That's contract 101. You got to have remedies if your vessel partner isn't going to pay the bills that he agreed to pay. City also focuses on Section 9, which they talk about fair market value as being an issue. Well, it is an issue. You got a $250,000 asset, and the city is well aware of these transfers. They take their cut from the transfer fees, but they're well aware of these exorbitant, payments that are made in connection with these slip transfers, and they're okay with it. Every now and then, the grand jury looks into it and says, well, this is kind of shady. You might want to change it. And the city generally says, yeah, we like things the way they are. So this is the status quo that's being objected to. And that's what's frustrating here, because this is what happens. You can put your head in the sand and say, no, that's not what's happening, but it is what's happening. You go to any one of the brokerages down there and ask any of them if they know of any slips for sale. You'll get some answers, right? So this is not an insignificant asset that's being taken away. I mean, yeah, the reason why they pay property taxes on it is because it is a significant asset. And those property taxes are based on a formula that is determined by the fair market value referenced in Section 9. If you talk to the assessor, that's how they come up with the property taxes on the market value, right? And then, they raise other contentions. They shoot down our contentions and say, oh, you say that it's never been rented. Well, it hasn't been rented. It's our boat. We're paying slip fees for our boat. We're just making one of the boat owners do it. They don't really respond to that. They just talk about, well, it'd be better if James were on the permit. Better for who? We don't want him a half owner of a $250,000 asset. And there's no requirement that the city acknowledges this. There's no requirement that all the owners of a vessel be on the slip permit. That's not required. And so he wasn't, but they knew about it. They knew about his ownership interest. He's on the permit as an owner, as a boat partner, well aware of this. The city also, seems to suggest that, if he had not been given any rights in the contract, he'd have no rights to the slip. Well, he has no rights to the slip. He has rights to the boat. Barcy has the rights to the slip. Barcy is the one who has his boat in the slip. And there's talk about how James is using the slip only in the context of being a part owner of the boat that is in the slip that is also owned by the slip permittee. This is an essential point. Yeah, I mean, the comments were made about, the nature of the contract terms, the unsigned contract provided to the city, and how they relate to, not the vessel, but the slip. Again, if you're paying berthing expenses or possessory interest expenses, you're paying vessel expenses. And again, this was looked at in 2017 by Scott Reedman. And there were some issues, and they weren't happy about it. But at the end of the day, the permittee kept their permit with the same kind of contract by the same broker. Somebody asked earlier about whether there was any benefit in addition to the payments that were allocated to Mr. James under the contract. Well, clearly, as I think Sarah acknowledged, there was no markup. There was no additional compensation paid or required in connection with the vessel expenses. The slip fees were paid dollar for dollar, no markup, not twice the slip fees, not some additional amount, just the expenses. The benefit was to preserve his rights to a slip that he thought he'd use a lot sooner than he was planning to. He was buying a house in Santa Barbara, some problems happened. It ended up that he needed to take more time to figure out how he was going to move into Santa Barbara. I won't bore you with the details, but they're not relevant. But somebody asked the question, why is he sitting in this for 13 years? Well, because he had some other plans, but it shouldn't matter. He has a legal ownership interest in the boat assigned to that slip. And I see my time is coming up, so I'd like to reserve my time for any response after questions. Oh, actually, there's something I do want to point out, and this is, I'm sorry, I forgot about this. One of the points raised by the city is that this contract is called a contract for slip partnership, as though that somehow determines what we're talking about here. First of all, it's not a contract for slip permit partnership. It's identified by Peter Crane as a contract for slip partnership. And if you read the text of the contract, you can see that it all relates to paying the expenses that the vessel incurs in connection with that slip. And under maritime law, it's the boat that incurs the expenses, right? Under maritime law, the boat incurs the expenses for these necessaries that include things like slip fees. And so that boat is incurring these expenses, and the contract for the partnership addresses all of that. It's also important that from a legal standpoint, and I'll just give you a quick quote here, the name by which the parties designate their contract is not determinative of its nature. For instance, calling an agreement a lease doesn't make it a lease. Reference must be had to the instrument itself, to a reading and consideration of all its terms, conditions, and covenants to determine its true character. That's Smith v. Morton. I came up with that today when I saw the director's report that focused on the name as though that were a significant point. It's not a significant point what the unsigned document was called. And this makes sense. I mean, there's another case in 1990, Toyota Motor Sales, that talks about how, if you call something an independent contractor agreement, doesn't mean you've created an independent contractor arrangement. We all know that now.
Excuse me, if I may interrupt. Mr. Damon, if I may interrupt, you've gone over your 20-minute time limit.
Oh, okay.
I just want one point of clarification. You mentioned that this is an unsigned contract. So the two parties did not execute this contract?
I haven't seen a signed contract I guess we can get into discovery and find out whether it was signed by the parties or whether it was signed with powers of attorney by Peter Crane. I'm hopeful we don't have to go to court and do all that, but the facts are clear. You've presented, or the Waterfront Department has presented the documents in support of their denial, and the documents they've presented include an unsigned contract. And so part of my concern is that they're taking these kind of actions based upon an unsigned contract, which I will say, by the way, even if it were signed, shouldn't matter for all the reasons I've just spent 20 minutes talking about.
But it says right here in the copy we have that it was signed March 1st, and somebody made a note of that. And so you're saying that this was never signed?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying I have never seen a signed contract. I'm saying that the only contract provided to me by anybody is an unsigned contract. And for the city to take the kind of action they did based on an unsigned contract.
I mean, this is a pretty important point. So you have no knowledge that this was signed by either party?
As I said, I was not presented with a signed copy of the contract, but I want to be clear here because I don't think it's an important point. I bring it up only to talk about the way in which the city has taken the action that they have without any further due diligence. Whether that contract were signed or not signed, I think I've made a pretty compelling case that even if it were signed, that the terms of the contract do not amount to a sub-license, that they simply amount to an allocation of vessel-related costs that the vessel incurs under maritime law for its various necessaries. And that's an important point. And I've also made the point just now, I almost forgot about it, that what you call the contract doesn't matter. It's what it actually does. And I think that's an important point. So I want to be clear here. Whether it's signed or unsigned, in my view, is irrelevant. I'm just troubled by the fact that they've taken the action they have, which is why we're here today, based upon an unsigned contract. And what they produced today is an unsigned contract.
Yeah, no,
that's what's before this Harbor Commission.
The reason why I bring it up is you keep saying the unsigned contract. And so I'm just trying to get to the bottom of whether there's anybody has any knowledge of the contract being signed, not what you might have a copy of, but actual knowledge. Did your client say that he never signed the contract?
Well, obviously not going to talk about attorney-client privilege information. He may have, he may not have. Peter Crane may have. There was a power of attorney. If a signed contract pops up one day, it's not going to bother me because I don't think this case turns on that. It doesn't matter whether it's signed via power of attorney or whether it's signed by the parties themselves. Again, I bring this up because this is what's presented to the Harbor Commission. This is what you have in front of you.
Yeah, there are a couple of things about this contract I'd like to just ask about. One is that it says that the permittee minority vessel, I gotta get my glasses here, owners shall have no rights to use or operate majority vessel owner vessel. So you mentioned earlier that Mr. Forsey had been on the vessel and used it several times, but this says it, the way I read this, it says it can't use it.
Yeah, I've read that too. I'm not thrilled with it, but I don't think that's determinative, right? A, he's been on the boat, he has used it. B, it's my understanding that the boat is, what's the polite word for that boat? It's got some issues. And, I've got clients who own boats and only certain members of the family are allowed to operate them because certain boats require a certain level of skill, a certain knowledge of the boat. And these guys decided that with respect to this boat, it was only prudent to have somebody familiar with the boat, which, admittedly was Leslie James, operate the boat. And we're what the city is doing, they're trying to read into the code restrictions and prohibitions that don't exist, right? There aren't any standards or any specifics that address the nature and scope of a vessel partnership and how these are supposed to operate and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And this is why it gets very ambiguous and uncertain as to what it is we're even talking about, since there's no guidance on the operation of these vessel partnerships, which everyone acknowledges exist In fact, I would venture to say that every slip has some version of a vessel partnership either existing today or in its very recent past.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that governs that.
And, you know, and so, I think that from what I've heard, the city's position is that this agreement sounds a lot like a sub-license agreement. And so.
They can take that position.
Let me finish. I'm just trying to understand a couple of things. And so why would it require a deposit if this was a true partnership? Why is one partner paying another partner a deposit if it truly is a vessel partnership and not a slip? And if it was a vessel partnership, why doesn't it talk about the costs of operating the vessel and the insurance on the vessel and other costs, as you pointed out, that's kind of maritime 101?
Well, it does, as I recall, it does mention those things. They just weren't addressed in the director's report. But I think they would argue that that somehow works in their favor. That the more obligations you allocate to the other owner, somehow that makes it more likely that you've got some sort of illegal sublicense, when in fact it has no bearing on whether there's a sublicense, right? Allocating. I've got a case right now. I've got a partnership case right now where one of the partners was required to put up an extensive amount of good faith money to guarantee his performance under the contract. There's nothing unreasonable about saying, listen, we're going to do this deal. I need to trust that you're going to pay the expenses that you're supposed to pay under this contract. And to make sure you do, I want you to pony up a little extra so that I can have some confidence that my rights aren't going to be breached by you not paying what you're supposed to pay. And sure enough, in this case, the partner stopped paying the slip fees he was supposed to pay. Yeah. So, I mean, turns out that was the smart thing to do.
Okay, thanks. I'll turn it over to the other commissioners.
Commissioners?
I'd like to bring up the question of the unsigned agreement one more time. Although, Mr. Damon, I understand that you think it's not terribly relevant, but I believe Mr. James submitted this unsigned agreement to the waterfront department. So it seems like he has implicitly affirmed that this was the governing document. Can we say that that the 1% owner also would affirm that this was the document that governed them? Because otherwise, there may be some other document out there that's signed that's a whole different set of facts.
You raise a good point. I don't know. I haven't seen any other documents. I haven't seen a signed version of this. I haven't seen a signed or unsigned version of any others. But you raise an interesting point because if you're talking about, whether it's signed or unsigned or some uncertainty, one of the points the city raised, perhaps anticipating that I'd bring this up, given the fact that they presented you with an unsigned contract, they said, oh, the parties have performed. And there's some case law for confirming an agreement between two parties who have performed to some extent under that agreement, right? So you can have an unsigned agreement where the parties don't sign it, but they go on about the same sort of business and essentially do many of the things that the contract sets forth. And the courts will say, well, you may not have had a signed contract, but you clearly had an agreement and you clearly performed as though you had an agreement. Then the question then becomes what terms in the unsigned contract are enforceable versus the terms that were actually performed by the parties. And you get into a whole panoply of issues there. My position is, so what? Those are contract claims and remedies and issues between Mr. Barcy and Mr. James, and whether they're enforcing a signed contract or whether they're enforcing a partly performed contract, whatever the rights are between them should have no bearing on Mr. Barcy's right to have a boat that he owns in a permit, in a slip that he has a permit to use, and to have that boat be the one that the city approved that he had in there. This is not some other boat. This is not some other person. This is his vote in his slip. And that gets lost if we start talking about the contract remedies between James and Barcy, which frankly should have no bearing on this.
So, which contract were they talking about in this copy of this text, this picture of this text that says that the contract's terminated?
I'm sure they're talking about the unsigned contract. That's essentially what I've just been talking about, which is you can have an enforceable agreement based upon performance, even though you didn't sign the agreement, which is why it doesn't really, in my mind, doesn't matter whether it's signed or unsigned. You know, these people have rights against each other, whether they signed the agreement or didn't sign the agreement. But my view is that whether it's signed or unsigned, it doesn't impact the legal analysis of whether this is a sub-license. I defined for you under California law that a sub-license is a license granting a portion or all the rights granted to the licensee. Mr. Barcy did not grant a single right under the slip permit license. What he did was he allocated payment obligations to Mr. James, and that's not a sub-license.
Yeah, I don't know that it's our position to interpret California law. I think our role here is to look at what's going on here and make a determination of whether we agree with the slip termination that Mr. Wiltshire's done, or we don't agree. So I understand you're quoting a lot of California law, but you're talking to a lot of laymen here. And so I think we have to be a little bit careful. And I just, you know, I'm a little bit with Lang here about this unsigned contract. You keep saying that it doesn't matter if it's signed or unsigned, but then you keep calling it the unsigned contract, alluding, you know, trying to create the impression that
It goes up at a hearing and say, I have to deal with what the other side has presented and oppose whatever they've presented. The other side has presented an unsigned contract. If we, you know, if you guys decide, you know, that you want to see this go through the courts, we can do some discovery and figure out, you know, what all the other facts are. We can depose a bunch of people and spend a lot of money.
I mean, that's certainly their right. Anybody else want to jump in here?
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Damon. You made a couple references to 2017 and Scott Reedman, the previous waterfront director before Mr. Wiltshire.
Right.
What was precedent in that event? I mean, was any of this allocation of cost, you know, agreement I mean, what was the nature of that interaction in 2017, Mr. Damon?
I'll be honest, my information on that is based on hearsay. The city has access to those files, and I can actually give them the slip in question, which was 1F29. So they can go back and check their records and confirm to their satisfaction that the same sort of issues were raised and the same sort of objections were raised by Scott Reedman. And at the end of the day, the slip permit was not lost.
Okay. I appreciate that. That's important context.
Mr. Nelson?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I just have a question regarding the basically the partnership agreement. Is there a reason why it wasn't like a 50-50% partnership? Why Mr. Barcy was only a 1% owner in Varuna to retain the rights to the slip?
Well, listen, you know, I'll be blunt. Anyone who's been around the harbor for a lot less time than I have knows that when these partnerships are created, when slip transfers are done, the preferred allocation is 99% and 1%, because that's all the city requires. In fact, they don't even require the 1%. I was stunned to come across a bill of sale in another slip transfer where there was actually a percentage that was less than 1%. included on the bill of sale. I'd never seen that before, quite frankly. But that's the standard ratio, 99%, 1%, and then that's how you pass the city's rules and regulations to provide proof of ownership, proof of partnership, and that's what everybody goes with. And you can ask any broker down at the harbor, and they'll tell you the same thing. That's what they do.
I just have one other question as well. Was there a reason why Mr. James wasn't added as as part owner of the slip permit?
Yeah, I think because of that earlier. These slips, if you go to a broker and say, hey, I've had this slip and I'd like to transfer my rights, as you all know takes place, the brokers will say, okay, let me see if I can find somebody who would like to form a partnership with you and acquire these rights for some fair market value. And, right now, these are going for $250,000. And so you wouldn't just unilaterally give somebody an interest in a $250,000 asset without some compensation justifying that. And frankly, here again, there was nothing in the code, nothing in the rules and regulations that required, and this has been acknowledged before, that all of the owners of a boat be on the slip permit. That's not required. The city acknowledges that. If it's not required, why do it? Especially given the value of the slip.
Mr. Damon, you've stated that twice, and it's an interesting point. I would just like to hear the city, either Mr. Wilshire or Ms. Connect, say that they are in agreement with that. And it's interesting that in spite of that, if the co-owner had been on the slip, we're told we wouldn't be discussing this issue. So it's a little bit of a conundrum there. But is that from the city side? Is that accurate that there is never a requirement for a co-owner to be on the slip permit?
Honorable Chair and members of the commission.
Well, I think we have to wait on that question.
Yeah, at whatever time we can address that, I'd like to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah, you're in questions of the appellant right now.
All right, does the commission have any further questions for Mr. Damon? All right, well, with that, we'll move back to staff for 3 minutes, plus they've reserved some time.
Honorable Chair, before you go back to staff, may I make a recommendation that there is an opportunity for the public to comment during your procedures. You said that the public comment could come between the appellant's statement and then the staff response. I would recommend that you take public comment if there is any at this time.
Thank you very much.
Can you turn your volume up, Dan? Your output volume?
I'll try.
So there is one person from the public that has their hand raised. May I call on them at this point? Is that okay?
Please do.
Okay. Maura Gallagher, it's your turn to speak. I'm going to unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes. You may begin. It appears that you're self-muted at the moment.
Hi, my name is Maura Gallagher, and I've been listening to the whole commission meeting, and I just want to say how disheartened I am to hear this. I know it goes on, but I'm somebody who is never going to be able to afford a $250,000 broker fee for a slip in the harbor. And so I have to sit here and hope that someday I can win a lottery to have that opportunity. So I do hope that this goes into the courts, and I do hope that from this, perhaps something can be done to eliminate what is, what we all know what this is. And like I said, I think it's very disheartening. as someone to sit here and listen to Mr. Damon speak and talk about all the loopholes that he's hoping to get through with his client. And, I don't know. I just feel very, very sad listening to this. And I hope that as a commission someday, you'll make it fair for people who can't otherwise get into your harbor. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There is one additional hand raised, Jeff Escola. Jeff, I'm going to unmute you and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. And you are self-muted at the moment.
Good evening. Thank you, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is there any other concerns with slip permittees like James and Borsey? Are they acquiring any liveaboard permits or any other permits that would jeopardize that contract or kind of waive interest in that arrangement they've had for the last 20 years?
You want me to answer that, or?
I guess I was looking for the waterfront staff. Is there a liveaboard permits? Do they have any other permits? Do they have any other slips involved in the harbor that would be relevant to this discussion?
I'd be happy to address that.
Chair McRae, it's kind of your call if you want us to respond to public comment or just take public comment into consideration.
Waiting to find out from Mr. Henske if that's actually appropriate.
I believe it would be appropriate for both Mr. Wiltshire and Mr. Damon to answer the question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, to the member of the
David,
public.
you spoke up first, so go ahead.
Chair McRae, you're talking to me?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I'll go after you.
Yeah, no, I don't have too much to add there, but to the member of the public, I think what you're asking is, do we have other similar situations where this is going on? And I can say, no, not to my knowledge and not to the waterfront department's knowledge. When we receive this sort of information, we act on it. And so that's why we're here today. So I think I'm answering your question, but maybe not.
I think it was on this specific slip. Is there a liveaboard permit assigned to this slip? That's how I
Correct.
Question. And the answer is there is not one. And that raises a very good point, because if there were a liveaboard permit issued to Mr. Borsey and Mr. James were living aboard the boat, then that would be an example of certain rights passed to an individual that would not otherwise exist but for the existence of the permit, right? And so that wasn't present here. And I think that's an important distinction to make. And with respect to the woman who was concerned about the nature of these transfers in aggregate, I direct her to the grand jury reports. There's some real good commentary there. But remember, the city does a lot of its funding.
Can I interrupt
budget
here that
through
this
these
is a bit
transfers.
inappropriate to allow Mr. Damon to carry on a commentary at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to.
I agree. The question was asked of staff.
Yeah, Mr. Wilson, would you comment on that?
On the if there is a liveaboard permit on this specific slip?
Yes.
I'm under the impression there's not. I don't know for certain, but I can call on Jeanette Brzezinski or Eric Engritson, who would know specifically.
Eric, do you know?
Commissioners, no, there is no liveaboard on this particular slip.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have further public comment at this time?
There are no additional hands raised.
All right. So with that, I think we're up to having staff reserve time, and there are 3 minutes.
There's actually 6 minutes and 33 seconds left on staff time.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just jump in and start, and if I don't hit everything, then Mr. Wiltshire, you can pick up the things that I forget. And maybe I'll just start with this issue about the unsigned contract that just keeps on coming up to begin with. And it's true, the contract that we received from Mr. James, and you all have several copies of it in your packet, does say on the last page of it, signed March 1st, 2008 by both parties. So that's the only indicia we have, is that it does indicate that it was signed by both parties in 2008, but the version that we were presented with doesn't actually have their signatures on it. We do have, however, attached to Mr. Borisi's slip permit is the special power of attorney that I think that Mr. Damon raised, which is signed by Mr. Borisi, dated March 8th, 2008. And it does say, I, Jerry Borisi of Long Beach, do appoint Mark Scott Payne or Peter Crane of Santa Barbara as my true and lawful power of attorney for myself and for use and benefit to sign papers and documents that may be necessary in order to do the following and give him the rights with regard to the slip permit in the vessel. So I can assume that he probably has the signed contract. And if we need to, we'll get it from him. And I would assume that that is where the signed contract is. Going on from that, Mr. Damon raised the point about why, when Mr. Borisi came into the waterfront department and said that he wanted to get the Varuna out of his slip permit, why staff didn't do what they would normally do and offer him the forms to transfer in a new vessel. And the reason why is because he said he couldn't get access to the slip permit, and he couldn't get access to the slip, and he couldn't get access to the vessel, which of course was very unusual because according to the slip permit, he's the sole slip permittee, and he's the owner of the vessel, as Mr. Damon made quite clear to you. So he should have been able to walk down there, get to the slip permit. In fact, he's the only one, get to the slip. In fact, he's the only one that actually had the rights to get onto the slip, get into the slip and onto the boat. But of course, he probably didn't know how to operate the boat since he'd never been on it, because he had no right to get onto the boat and take the thing out. So he could have hired somebody to get in there, but he said he couldn't do that. And that's why he needed the help. Now that's what you call acting upon a contract, right? That's what you call performance. He was relying on that contract because he believed that he didn't have the right to access that slip or access that boat, because that's what the contract said. Clearly, since 2008, both parties had relied upon that contract, which said, Mr. Borisi, you can't access that slip, you can't access that boat. Now, you know, Mr. Damon makes a lot of hay about the fact that no, Mr. Borisi he didn't transfer the slip permit. He didn't have any rights, transfer any rights under the slip permit to Mr. James. Well, you know, that's right, because we didn't recognize that contract. He didn't transfer. The city of Santa Barbara has a slip permit. It wouldn't have been possible without going through our procedure to transfer that slip permit. This wasn't an official transfer of a slip permit where Mr. Borisi would have had to give up his rights under the slip permit and in return get $250,000. No, he was saving that for a later day. That's the problem here, is he's about to lose that $250,000 potentially. No, so he wanted to save that for a later day. So what he did is he gave up all the other rights under the slip permit to Mr. James. And that's what's evident in this contract. And this contract, you know, Mr. Damon makes a big deal about the words of this contract mean nothing, that it just has to do with the vessel. Well, you know, this contract, when you read it, it says what it is. It calls the city's slip permit the master lease. Several times it calls out the city's slip permit as the master lease. It says this is a sublet under the master lease. I don't know how much clearer you could get.
Where does it say that?
it says it under, let me just pull up my marked copy here. So if you're looking at it, if you go to paragraph 5 on page 2, it says the majority vessel owner shall make all payments in the amount set forth by the city of Santa Barbara in the master lease.
Where does it say sublease?
Oh, no, it says master lease. It
If you
calls
said
this-
sublease.
That I said this indicates it's a sublease, right? When it's referring to the city's slip permit as the master lease. And then again, on page 3, in paragraph 9, it says breach of master lease, rules and regulations of the city of Santa Barbara. And this is where it talks about if James causes a loss of Boris's slip permit, James is obligated to pay the fair market value of the slip permit. So then, the fact that the parties acted in reliance on this contract is, I think, really important here. And it's evident by the documents that James produced when he submitted to us the letter from Mr. Borisi to Mr. James terminating this agreement for failure to pay slip fees. And that's pretty clear evidence that the parties relied upon this contract for all those years since 2008. Mr. Borisi terminated the contract, determined it was that James was in breach for failure to pay slip fees.
If I may interrupt, we just hit the 20-minute mark.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you have 3 more minutes, is that correct?
Or did we use all of our time?
That was all of the 20 minutes.
And then she was also allocated
I think
3
we
more
have
minutes.
a 3-minute closing. So I really don't have anything further to add. Mr. Wilshire might want to just add a couple words in conclusion.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to belabor the point, but really from all angles, this agreement is clearly more than a vessel partnership agreement. Really, the terms and conditions of the agreement are well laid out and govern who has usage and rights to the slip, not just the vessel. So it lays out clear terms and transfers rights to the non-slip permittee. I'm honestly not sure how you could craft a sub-license agreement that would look much different than this. Like it really governs the usage of the slip. So, I mean, Mr. Borisi received this 50-foot slip off the wait list, doesn't live in town and has not regularly used the slip for the last 13 years. So he's really found a way to preserve his financial interest in the slip permit without having to pay fees. So he maintained a 1% interest really solely to meet the requirement of being a slip holder, but has kind of found a way to preserve his slip permit and hold the value in it while subleasing it out. That's all I have.
Commissioners? You have any questions for staff? Either Ms. Connect or Mr. Wiltshire?
Oh yeah, I have a question. Yeah, can we just clarify the notion that the people that are owners of the slip, they must be also the people that own the boat, and vice versa, the people that own the boat must also be owners of the slip. Can we just clarify that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot to clarify that. So the slip permittees, a slip permittee must be at least a 1% owner on a vessel, but not all vessel owners must be slip permittees. So it is true that not all vessel owners need to be slip permittees, but all slip permittees must have at least a 1% ownership interest in the vessel that's berthed in the slip.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions? I have a question. Are the fees in question actually paid current to the harbor or not at this point?
Commissioner McCray, I'm not certain on that. I believe they are. I do have Jeanette Brzezinski and Eric Ingebretson. And another point is the fees were paid from James directly to Mr. Borisi, who paid fees to the waterfront department. But I believe they are current to June 11th, which is when the slip was terminated. Jeanette.
Hi, everybody. Jeanette Prusinski here. Just real quick. Yes, the account was closed and all fees were paid. So the account is current.
Thank you.
I
So,
have
Go
a
ahead.
quick question, Merritt, for waterfront. If this matter goes forward into the courts, what will be the status of the slip and the vessel in Santa Barbara Harbor?
Yeah, that's a good question, Commissioner Stedman. The slip will be held as basically a visitor slip in the city's pool until this matter is finally resolved. And once that happens, the waterfront will make a decision on it going to the wait list or being a part of the visitor. But we will hold it as a visitor slip for the waterfront until this is fully resolved.
So even though the account, like was mentioned, closed on June 11th and current, you're going to be billing them for visitor slip fees. Is that correct?
No, Commissioner Stedman,
No.
the vessel's not currently in the slip. So
Okay.
the slip is vacant, and yeah, the vessel's not in the slip.
All right. So we're not generating any revenue from that currently.
Not at the moment.
Okay.
Commissioner Sly, I recall that you had a question earlier. Do you recall what that was, or did it get answered already?
Sorry, I had to find my button here. I was asking for the department to, if they agreed that there was no requirement for a co-owner to be added as a slip permittee, and I think that was answered. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for staff? All right, I'm going to open it up to discussion amongst ourselves.
Did
Something like that.
Yeah.
Mr. Damon has 3 minutes of rebuttal.
Oh, pardon me. Go ahead, Mr. Damon.
Great, thanks. One of the commissioners asked, or maybe actually it was Mr. Wilshire, how different would this look if it was a true sub-license agreement? The answer to that is quite simply, if it was an agreement with a true sub-licensee who was not Mr. James. That's how it could be a sub-license agreement. That misses the point completely that what we have here is not a sub-license. So to say, how could it look any less like a sub-license agreement, misses the point that it is not a sub-license agreement. You'd have to have somebody with a different boat. As far as the fees are concerned, my client kept getting charged. He's on an auto pay account. He was paying through July, long after the slip permit was terminated. And apparently they extracted some additional funds from Mr. James. With respect to what Sarah raised in connection with references in the lease, in the contract regarding the master lease. Yeah, there's some references in there to a master lease, but there is no master lease, is there? There is no master lease here. What we have is a license agreement in a slip permit that the permittee used. So the fact that this contract, which is full of misstatements regarding what these things are, says master lease is not of any value to Ms. Connect because it mischaracterizes what the underlying arrangement is. This is by no means a work of art. And as I pointed out earlier, you know, the labels given aren't determinative. Somebody raised a question about, through Sarah again, raised the question about, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, Ms. Connect, I've known her for a while, very competent attorney. She made a reference to the power of attorney that was signed by my client. It's true. He did sign a power of attorney, and it did give Mr. Crane and his staff the rights to sign documents on his behalf. And the waterfront has provided this commission with those documents. It's the slip permit. Those power of attorney forms were used to sign the slip permit on behalf of Mr. Barcy. So that's what they were used for. This is like, you know, this idea that, you know, we'll dig up a signed contract somewhere. You know, this was the time for presenting your evidence. You've got an unsigned contract you're trying to, you know, make a lot of hay about. I just bring up the point that you presented the commission with an unsigned contract. It's not my burden to find this to find the signed one. I have, to be clear, I have not seen any signed contracts. And then as far as like this access to the, Ms. Connect made a reference to the fact that, you know, my client had no access to the slip, had no access to the slip permit. That's not true. The contract makes no reference to him not having access to the slip permit. It makes no reference to him not having access to the slip. It just limits his ability to use and operate the vessel, which partnership agreements for vessels can do. I draft these things. You can allocate responsibilities. You know, people invest in a boat and they decide who's best capable of handling the boat. I mean, that doesn't change the nature of the agreement to some sort of slip permit assignment or license.
If I may interrupt, we've hit the 3-minute mark. Thank you.
Commissioners, questions for Mr. Damon? All right, so do we have any public comment? Is that appropriate at this time?
Actually, Honorable Chair, you've already had the public comment. Now is the time to close close the hearing and go into your deliberations.
All right, so with that, we will. Commissioner Sloan? No?
I didn't have anything to add. I mean, I'll let others speak first.
Ms. Kramer, Commissioner Kramer?
Fine, thank you. I haven't asked any questions, and I read very carefully the staff report, all the documents, and I was puzzled. I absolutely could not see how one owner would license to another owner. And so I failed to see how there was a sub-license. And so that's where I come down on this. And I also thought that probably the waterfront needs to go back and maybe make some changes in code sections and various things of that sort. It used to be annually that Ms. Connect would come before the Harbor Commission with a variety of changes to Muni Code Section 17 or whatever it is, and we would rubber stamp them and so forth, but that's not relevant to this. And so I was been really puzzled, and so that's where I failed to see how there was a sub-license, and therefore I failed to see how Mr. Barcy did not or broke the rules and regulations of the waterfront department. So that's my comment.
Other comments?
Yes, but I appreciate Betsy's comments on this. I'm troubled by the city acting in an opportunist manner. I mean, but for Mr. Borcy's actions, the city would have no idea that this was going on. They've admitted that. So now they're acting in an opportunist way to try to create a sub-licensing agreement and get this transaction completely into the violation box. So I'm troubled by that. You know, I like to see everybody follow the rules. We spend a lot of time on them. Betsy's also right. We haven't had any code initiative reviews for quite some time. And that's an important point to keep in mind in terms of our general proceedings. So I agree with Betsy.
Other comments?
I'll add a comment. We're dealing with this unsigned agreement that Mr. Damon says doesn't matter, but that kind of forms the basis of a lot of the discussion. And we've got an owner who is not registered as a slip permittee, but is not required to be registered as a slip permittee. And it seems to me beside the point who's actually, which owner is actually paying how much of which fees, as long as they get paid by the responsible parties. So I'm kind of in line with Commissioner Kramer and Commissioner Stedman. I don't think this is compelling that there was anything that unusual about this. You know, without understanding the fine points of, admittedly, without understanding the fine points of contract law.
Other comments?
What bothers me is the ambiguity that if he was, in fact, if James was a slip mentioned as a slip permittee, we wouldn't be talking about this contract. There would be no sub-license. And the fact that that is the case makes me want to agree with Betsy and John on this. But I think clearly the Waterfront Department has proved that the contract went beyond simply the allocation of financial obligations. I actually believe that the contract controlled the access and use of that permit, which does create a sub-license. So for me, the quandary is the fact that we wouldn't even be talking about it had Mr. Morrissey added Mr. James to the permit. That's what I'm dealing with, is that the municipal code wasn't clear on that. So I'm still hedging a little bit. I mean, I'll make a decision when it's time to vote. But I think staff clearly established that the contract went beyond financial obligations of a boat ownership agreement and actually controlled the access and use of the slip, which is, you know, by definition, a sub-license. So.
Other comments?
Yeah, I guess I'm struggling with it as well, except, you know, it really comes down to this contract and what's in it. And so, you know, the fact that Mr. Morrissey cannot use or operate the vessel, not operate, but use or operate. And I understand, I mean, I've had several slips and several boats down there, and there are people that I'd let drive them and others who I wouldn't. Most people that have boats don't do that, but any use of it, it says here. And then the fact that I understand this, there's some issues with this lease, but I mean, this contract, but it does talk about the term of the lease shall be 1 year. So they use the word lease in there. And then as Ms. Connect pointed out, they talk about the master lease. So, you know, it's a little bit of, you know, it's, you know, it's not passing the duck test to me. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck. So that's where I'm struggling with. And you know, I don't know, that's where I'm I'm probably a little bit with Michael on this. I'm struggling with it. It sure feels like a sublease contract.
Commissioner
Eric,
Stanley?
There you go.
Yeah, for me, I'm just kind of puzzled by the fact that I was always under the assumption that boat owners also had to be on the slip. And that to me is, it was kind of new to this. And also in regards to the contract, even though it wasn't signed, they were still operating under the agreement that they were going to be paying each other the fees that were in this. But I think for me, yeah, defining a sublease or a sublease in this case is pretty big. And I'm still kind of hung up on that because to me, an allocation of costs to another person pretty much represents a sublease. And that's kind of where I'm at. And the fact that the fees were paid from James to Morrissey, then the waterfront, is another thing that to me seems like a sublease. But
It's a license.
yeah, but yeah, that's where I'm at. Defining basically assignment of the slip and defining what is a sublease.
Thank you. Commissioner Nelson, did you have something?
No. My frustration is that the municipal code is not clear. And because it's not clear, we're being asked to make a decision to deny Mr. Boris's appeal. But clearly, the contract went beyond an allocation of cost and actually controlled the access to the slip, which the code as it's presently established says you can't do.
Any other comments? So here are my thoughts on it. I think that it's clear that this is a subterfuge in order to be able to just retain this rights to the slip by one person, and the other person is actually given the use of it. The real question ends up being whether or not they were effective at navigating the loopholes, as one commenter put them. And my sense is, I know I'm not the person to be able to make that kind of call. And it seems the city is more than willing to chase this dog wherever it goes. And I'm inclined to give it to them to chase down. I'm not sure really how this works out in a legal sense because I'm no lawyer. But I think the intent is pretty clear. If there are no other comments, I'm going to call the question. Excuse me. I'll entertain a motion. I'm getting out of line here.
I guess to move things along here, I would make a motion that we uphold the waterfront director's denial of the waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q1 and reject the appeal.
And do we have a second?
Somebody want to make another motion then?
Would somebody like to make another?
I will move to uphold the appeal.
I second that motion.
And Betsy, would you like to talk about why, or would you like us to go to the?
I think I already spoke about why I thought, and I think we should go to the vote.
All right, so with that, I'll call the question.
Can I just make a clarification? Either we're upholding the denial or we're overturning the denial. So I'm a little bit confused on what you say by upholding the appeal. Maybe you could clarify that, Betsy?
Let me see exactly what it says, what we're supposed to be doing.
Maybe, maybe can we have Angela read the recommendation, please?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Hi, we're going to get that on the screen right now, but it's item number 9, and the recommendation is that Harbor Commission consider the appeal of the Waterfront Director's denial of the appellant, Mr. Jerry Borisi's request for waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001 in the Santa Barbara Harbor and take action to either A, uphold the Waterfront Director's denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001 and reject the appeal, or B, overturn the Waterfront Director's denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q001 and grant the appeal.
Then I will rephrase my motion, if that's acceptable, to overturn the Waterfront Director's denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q1 and grant the appeal.
I again second that motion.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question.
I'll just make one comment. I do this with a little bit of, well, with some regret, because I do appreciate the work that the Waterfront Director has been doing. He's relatively new on the job, and I think he's been doing a tremendous job. And I certainly appreciate the work that Harbor Operations Manager Engbertson does, and everyone, including Ms. Brzezinski. So I want to make sure that I'm making that clear.
Thank you. Any further comments? I will, with that, I'll call the question. Could we get a roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Sloan,
No.
Commissioner Stanwyck,
No.
Commissioner Stedman,
Yes.
Commissioner Kramer,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
No.
Commissioner Sly,
Yes.
and Chair McRae.
No.
That was 4 votes for no.
All
The
right,
motion-
it looks like
motion
the
did not
city
pass.
may have a tussle on their hands. But it's something that it sounds like is, it's an issue, and it's not only an issue here, but it may be a broader issue, and I think it will, it'll send a message. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, we do need a motion to, we had a motion to overturn that failed. We need an affirmative motion to uphold the director's denial.
I'll resubmit my motion to uphold the Waterfront Director's denial of waiver of termination of slip permit 1Q1 and reject the appeal.
And I'll second that motion.
Is there any further discussion? Ms.
Can I
Rodriguez,
explain my
go ahead.
No, I think that my vote is being made to address this problem so we don't wind up here again. If this thing goes to court, the consequence of that court action will drive the revision or improvement of the commercial code to deal with this transaction more clearly.
Thank you.
I agree with you, Michael.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think that the 3 of us that just commented are on the slip transfer committee, and we've been mired in this for months now. And so this is just the continuation of something that we've been dealing with quite a bit. And so I think that's where a lot of the frustration lies.
Right. 100%.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to say, I think, Merritt, what you were saying earlier about it's pretty evident what's going on here and just the framework behind this. And that's where my vote is coming in to basically uphold the denial waiver.
All right. Ms. Rodriguez?
Okay. Commissioner Stanwyck,
Yeah, aye.
Commissioner Stedman,
No.
Commissioner Kramer,
No.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sly,
No.
Commissioner Sloan,
Aye.
and Chair McRae.
Aye.
That's 4 votes for yes. The motion passes.
All righty then. As I mentioned before, I think this will take us places where we probably don't want to have to go, but we do indeed have to go, and we'll see what comes of it. I believe that completes our business. How are we doing?
I think we need to do commission staff communication and then adjourn.
Mr. Volster?
Oh, yeah, no, it's been a long meeting, so I'm just gonna hold any communication for the next round. Thanks for your patience, but I'll pass on any staff updates for now.
Thank you very much.
Merritt?
Yes.
Mr. Wiltshire, is there any decision made on the October Seafood Festival?
It's a good question. We were just talking about it the last couple of weeks in staff meetings. So as of a week ago, we're gonna kind of try and somewhat move forward with it. It may look a little different, but yeah, it's kind of a day-to-day decision. So as of now, we're going to start trying to plan for it with the understanding that it could be pulled on us at any time based on county health orders and just the idea of having that many people down here. So I'll be happy to report on that at our next meeting as well, because we may have a little more information.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would, at this point, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And I believe we need a roll call vote for this as well.
Okay, this is a motion to adjourn the meeting. Commissioner Stedman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kramer,
Aye.
Commissioner McRae,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Sly,
Aye.
Commissioner Sloan,
Aye.
and Commissioner Stanwyck.
Aye.
All right, that's unanimous.
Thank you and good night.
Say good night.
I think